Hello, hello. How is everyone doing on this very rainy Wednesday where I live? Very gray day, but these tend to be the best days to study philosophy and psychology. How's everyone in the chat? Are you hyped for part two of chapter three that we did not cover last time? And I was a little bit annoyed at that fact, I suppose, because um, it felt like the lecture was not long enough. But in retrospect, it probably was for the best because there are really distinct themes in the two parts of each of the chapter three, and that second part is really focused on male power fantasies. And since this is a theme that is dear to my heart, I really wanted to take the time to talk about it only without, in a sense, mixing and matching it with this notion of knowing yourself. If you haven't watched part one, it's fine. Just know that the themes are connected. So, in the first part of chapter three, Jung tells us that it is deeply important to be aware of the unconscious, to be able to know oneself. And in part two, we're going to talk about what to do with this power. And what to do with this power is how to become a man, how to integrate that part of that masculine energy in your life. And I have a lot of great things for you guys. I've prepared a few stories and myths, both modern and ancient, that we're going to study from a Jungian perspective, and that we're going to see our male power fantasies and much more complex than one could think at first glance. This is the power of symbol and myth. But we're going to believe in give or take 10 minutes just to give time for people to make up to class, to show up to class. And so I'm going to answer a few questions in the meanwhile. Also, as you might see in the title, it's also a dream analysis. So the first part of this stream is going to be a lecture, and then I'm going to go on the coffee page and we're going to analyze your dreams like we did last time that you guys liked a lot. I'm going to actually put it here up in the pinned comments. Boom. And so if you want to send a dream for analysis, or if you just want to support the channel, that is in the description and in the pinned comments. So let's see how you guys are doing. Will we have time to write down notes? It depends on how fast you write. Which translation of demons should we read? I will let you guys know when we start reading demons. Fasted Frenzy Fitness, I see that you changed your names. What if I don't have dreams? You have dreams, you just don't remember them. How to come with terms that nothing is forever. That is what makes the beauty of life. If life was forever, if you could live forever, life would have no value and no real taste to it. Can you answer questions that border on today's context? We will, maybe, if there is time at the end of the lecture. Just bought Beyond Good and Evil at Barnes & Nobles the other day. Thank you for making me more aware and informed of both Jung and Nietzsche. Inspired further interest in their work for both my own personal, I suppose, interest in self-development. I'm happy that I encourage you to pick up these authors. What shampoo do you use? I use a shampoo that's like some organic stuff with mint and with like organic oil. It's some like fancy schmancy stuff. Are you for the rumbling? More or less. It's a complicated questions. UNH, you told me how to analyze literature, and I built a perfect project for literature class. Great. Glad to see that. Whole chicken, when? Not on stream. Not on stream. How tall are you? I'm 6 feet. Did you finish Arcane? Yes, I did. Season 2 was actually really good. I think that the animation is just so far ahead of what everyone else is even able to produce that they don't really have a competition. Even Japanese animation cannot really match it because they don't have the time and the wealth to produce like that. What do you read in your spare time? Philosophy for the most part, and manga, lots of manga. I started reading La Société du Spectacle. It's a great book. Is being delusional on purpose productive if you don't become a victim to your delusions, which takes a level of discipline? If you had to be a fanboy, who would be your idol? I'm a huge fanboy of Miyamoto Musashi. I don't even try to hide it. I just have such respect for the man. Dungeon Meshi is cool. Yeah, it was hard to get into it because the first few episodes it felt like just a random slice of life bullshit, like anime that I can't stand. But then it gets very interesting, and it's actually pretty dark. When the second Dune video coming out? I hope February. Is hard getting better or worse? It's getting worse, but not for the reasons people think. It's just that we have less and less time to make art because it's just not paying the bills. So we have a ton of artists that could greatly change the world and improve it with our beauty or meaning that just will never get to do that. Did you watch Lord of the Rings? Of course. It's huge in France. Probably like the #1 movie in France for young men. What's your dream car? I don't have a dream car. As long as the car drives, that's all I care about. Drop your gym playlist. The gym playlist has been dropped for years and years at this point. You just go on Spotify and you type natural hypertrophy, and there it is. I'm going to cover Dune Messiah. Yes, it's my favorite book, but I don't know when. Maybe I'll wait for the movie to come out. Will there be any more videos this week? Maybe. We'll see. I already posted one Monday, and you're getting a stream today, so that's already 2 videos. Do you think being someone like Musashi that didn't have kids and spent most of his life killing people is worth celebrating? Not trying to make anyone mad. Well, you look at it from the perspective that you have of modern age, but back then, that was what being a samurai was. I do agree that it's a shame he didn't have kids, but that was the path and the way of the samurai. That was Bushido, and he was the best at it. It's very easy to judge him from our perspective because in our day in life, we do not have to kill people to survive or to make a living. Is it wrong to hold on to hope for a girl even though she seems to be very much on the fence? If she's on the fence, then she's not into you that much, or else she wouldn't be on the fence. You can hold up hope, but don't let it prevent you from finding out someone who actually wants you. You don't want a cat monster truck? Nah. These shits are like crazy. I hate in America is insane. Everyone has like these big ass cars that they don't really need. So oftentimes I'll be driving behind someone and their car is so big I cannot see like beyond them. So if they drive slow, I have no fucking idea what's coming. And every time it's like a guy who works in like marketing or real estate. He doesn't need that truck. They take 2 parking spaces. It's so annoying. Thanks for getting on your grind again. Well, I've always been on the grind. It's just that it used to be a corporate grind, and now that I no longer do that shit, I have more time for YouTube. How should one end a date? With a gesture that is going to be, in a way, an introduction to the next date. So it could be a kiss, it could be holding hand, it could be anything, but it has to be something. It's very important. When will you shave the beard and drop the face chop to get the jawline back? I always have a jawline, but I have fat here. Mm. The Sardaukar seemed a bit underpowered in the second movie. Yes, they were nerfed big time, and it's established in the books that one Fremen is worth 3 or 4 Sardaukar, but the scene in the movie where Paul just like walks by is not in the books for a reason. It's because the Sardaukars would have died trying to stop him because he's getting close to the Emperor. They would have never allowed it. Like they're super loyal. That's what makes them so powerful. And in the movie, they're just like they just cut down and they let Paul just walk through. The battle in the second movie was not handled properly, in my opinion. Can you make videos in French? No. English is an international language. How are you doing? I'm doing fine, I guess. Yeah. Do French women shave less? That's a great idea. That's a great question. I have no idea. Shouldn't we let go of male power fantasies and just live in the moment? Well, you'll get an answer to that question very soon. How often do you think about Stoicism? Never. Stoicism is interesting because it's a philosophy that tends to really appeal to people who are not Stoic naturally, whereas that's my base state. And so I'm much more into philosophies and psychologies of emotions, Nietzschean philosophy and Jungian philosophy, because that's what I like. So you don't think artists have the time to create and change the world? No. Because the guy that could make these beautiful murals or fresks is stuck working a dead hand job because he has to pay the bills. We need to bring back patrons. We need to be back mecena and the ability for people to be sustained via a system. You know, this is one thing that I actually like in more socialist-based societies, where if you can actually have organizations that are going to allow artists to just focus on their art through public funds, that tends to produce better societies, more beautiful societies. Of course, it depends on the art it tends to promote. I'm not super into that modern shit. Why do you live stream when it's my bedtime? Because this is the time that is the best for everyone. I looked at every single like time zone, and this is where, give or take, everyone is awake or somewhat awake. But if you cannot, if you have to go to bed, go to bed. I mean, you will always be able to catch these streams later on. Do you think being a correctional officer or prison guard is immoral or wrong? That's a great question. Um, you have to know that what you're going to do and the people you're going to work with, there are a lot of them who have bad characters because that's why they're attracted to that job. They love control. They love that feeling of power over inmates that don't have that power. In a way, you could make an argument that it is moral if you go into it trying to improve the lives of the prisoner or trying to be humane towards them at least. What about fiction versus philosophy for personal development? It serves the same purpose. Oftentimes, works of fiction can serve more because you can relate to the characters, and also it's just easier to read. You mentioned that we lack what Stoicism is supposed to cure in the Greeks. How do you achieve to be more passionate like the ancient Greeks? You integrate your shadow self, you integrate your Dionysian self, which is what Nietzsche and Jung talk about, and we're going to talk about it today. Okay, I think we're at the point where most people who are going to show up have already shown up, so we are going to begin the lesson. So as I said, we are part 2 of chapter 3 for the people who are reading the book and want to follow it. And we are going to study today the idea of the male power fantasy. What is a male power fantasy? It is a story, imagination based for the most part, that has never happened, that is taught to young men to teach them how to become a positive masculine figure down the line. And these stories have always existed. They still exist to this day. The majority of you guys who watch anime and manga, you are watching male power fantasies. This is why you like them so much. There are toxic male power fantasies. There are positive male power fantasies. I have 4 examples today of modern and ancient male power fantasies that you most likely already know about that we're going to be studying. But before that, we're going to go into the book. So, if you were the last time, we ended by saying that one must know as much as possible about primitive psychology, mythology, archaeology, and comparative religion, for the reason that these fields afford priceless analogies. These analogies allow you to connect aspects of your life to these stories to be able to know what you must improve on, what your weaknesses are, etc., etc. And the same is true in dreams. This is why when I interpret your dreams, I interpret them via symbolism. This is exactly what I did last time. And what I found overwhelmingly is that every single time I brought up a symbol, the people that I interpreted their dreams for were able to find meaning in these symbols. This makes the symbols valid. A symbol is not real or true or not true. It depends entirely on the effect it has on the quote-unquote patient. To enter a realm of immediate experience is most stimulating for those who have done their utmost in the personal and rational spheres of life and yet have found no meaning and no satisfaction there. It all depends on how we look at things and not on how they are in themselves, which is what I just told you. The least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it. This is why these fantasies have such values. It is as if one began to build a bridge out into space. This is Jung talking about the development of masculinity and how to become yourself. This is the process of individuation. If you think about it for a second, people like to talk about the true self, your true self. But what is even your true self? Well, this is what is described here. It's to build a bridge out into space because there is no true self. You are reaching onto something that you are building as you reach it. And a true self, by definition, could just be the self that makes you the happiest, the most complete, the most developed, etc., etc. That is your true self. And this is an endeavor that one must take. So you are, in a sense, going out to seek something that you will not just only discover, you will also be building. In following this procedure, the doctor and his patient are both together indulging in mere fantasies. So the construction of the self is a fantasy because the self in itself is also a fantasy. You know, the idea of the undiscovered self. What even is the self? Well, the self is a spiritual thing. So, for example, if you believe in the self, and most people believe in the self, then you are spiritual in a way, because the self was never proven scientifically. There's not a compartment of the brain that contains the self. It is a vague and obscure concept, the one that is absolutely important, because if you do not know yourself, if you do not work on yourself, your chances of having a good, fulfilled life is extremely, extremely small. To me, it is actually the maternally creative side of the masculine spirit. When all is said and done, we are never proof against fantasy. It is true that there are worthless, inadequate, morbid, and unsatisfying fantasies whose sterile nature will be quickly recognized by every person endowed with common sense. What I said previously. The idea of the male power fantasy is neither positive nor negative, it just is. I could cite you a gazillion negative male power fantasies. A good example is solo leveling. I made a video about. It's essentially a story about a guy who's super weak, is granted divine powers out of the wazoo, trains and becomes incredibly powerful, and then becomes finally the man he always wanted to be. That is a toxic male fantasy because at the end of the day, he's not really responsible for his own emancipation and his own development. It fell onto his lap. So this is a terrible lesson to give to young men because this is not going to happen to you. All the works of man have their origin in creative fantasy. What right have we then to disappreciate imagination? In the ordinary course of things, fantasy does not easily go astray. It is too deep for that and too closely bound up with the taproot of human and animal instinct. So I think that this is also important to say before I present these stories to you guys, because oftentimes the negative criticisms attached to the interpretation of these stories is to say they are just stories. And Jung says there is no such thing as just stories. These stories exist for a reason. The reason why we keep telling these stories thousands of years after the fact is because there is an innate value in them. And if I were to connect it to modern times, the stories that people quickly forget tend to be the ones that did not have this innate value. Solo leveling is going to be completely forgotten about in give or take 5 years. Something like Berserk is going to be still remembered in 100 years. You can put money on that because it's a fundamental myth. And every fundamental myth is there to stay because it replicates a pattern that everyone can actually relate to. The fact that all of that is also closely related to human and animal instinct is also very important because this means that when you hear or listen to these myths and these male power fantasies, there is something in you that is beyond the cultural that connects you with them. And that could be your humanity. It could be, again, the collective unconscious that makes it so that regardless of where you come from on Earth, if I tell you that story, it's going to invoke something in you, in your imagination. And the word imagination is very important because that is the nature of fantasy. The conduit of fantasy is imagination. Jung, and we spoke about that last week, says that for people with no imagination and no spiritual connection, they have a very tough time tapping into these myths, and that tends to be highly detrimental for their day-to-day life. The creative activity of the imagination frees man from his bondage to the nothing but and liberates in him the spirit of play. As Schiller says, man is completely human only when he is playing. And that could be a video in and of itself. Nietzsche also says that man is most man when he is like a child at play. What does that mean? It means being able to separate yourself from the seriousness of life and recognizing that the seriousness that we talk about is really consciousness, and that the fun, the, in a sense, the mystical part of life, the unconscious, the imagination, the fantasies, all of that is what made us kids. When you are a kid, you are not that rooted in reality. Toddlers, for the most part, act like they're on PCP and LSD 24/7 because they're still very close to the unconscious. And if I were to expand on the theory as to why, it's because when you are in the womb and you are in your mother's belly, you are in a sense in a state of unconsciousness, and the belly in itself represents the unconscious. Then you are brought to the world. You are separated. The umbilical cord is cut, and you are forcibly separated from the unconscious. But you're not really fully liberated from it. It takes years and years and years for your conscious self to become the dominant force in your life. Before that, you are still very much an unconscious being. I would argue that most kids start to snap into reality around 5 or 6 years old. This comes with, in a sense, of benefits because now you can actually integrate society, learn new things, you become useful. But you also lose something very important, and that is your innocence, and most importantly, your sense of whimsy and your ability to see magic. There is a reason why, whenever there is talk about ghosts, about fairies, who sees them? It tends to be kids. it tends to be these young kids who have these abilities that eventually disappear. You also have a lot of testimonies of kids who seem to be able to remember a previous life, and in full detail sometimes, where it's actually very, very striking. Why? Who knows? But to me, that is connected to the unconscious. So this is something that I must say, because this is the mindset that I want you guys to enter as I am going to read you these 4 stories and interpret them to you guys. Please keep in mind this feeling of whimsy and this imagination. Imagination right now is going to be king. So let us begin. So the 4 stories I have prepared for you, I decided to go both modern and ancient. So I have 2 Greek stories, and then I have 2 modern stories in the form of Disney movies. That way, I'm certain that those of you who don't read Greek mythology are still going to be aware. Before that, I'm going to plug the laptop. Okay. So the 4 stories I have for you is one, the myth of Theseus. I'm sorry if my pronunciation is not the best. I only know how to pronounce these themes and these names in French. I also have the story of Orpheus. Okay, I'm going to say it in French. Theseus et Orpheus. Okay. Then I have the story of Pinocchio. So that's a Disney movie. And we also have the Lion King. So all of that we're going to try and interpret through the lens of Jungian psychology, and most importantly, through the lens of male power fantasies, the power of fantasy to teach man how he is to behave, how he is to develop himself. So let us begin with Theseus. The myth of Theseus, for those of you who don't know, is the myth of the Minotaur. The idea is that back in the days, Minos, the king of Crete, prayed to Poseidon so that his city would be blessed. And to receive a symbol of this blessing, he received a white bull. This white bull was the sign that Poseidon was actually granting him his blessing, but under one condition, that the bull had to be sacrificed. So in a way, it was a typical, in a sense, test by a god to give you something of value that you know you want to keep, and to tell you to then sacrifice it. Look at Christian theology. It's the same with God asking someone to sacrifice their son to him. He's saying, prove to me through your devotion that you love me more than your son. It is the same with Poseidon. Although I don't think that Poseidon would have stopped the sacrifice of the bull at the last second. That is the difference between the ancient gods and the new god. The new god is much nicer. So, in the story, Minos, who receives the white bull, eventually decides to not sacrifice it because he likes it too much. It's too beautiful. It's a sign of his power, so he will keep it. Naturally, it's not the type of things that you want to do with the Greek gods because they don't fuck around. So, what Poseidon does is that he goes to Aphrodite, and Aphrodite curses Pasiphae, who is Minos' wife, and forces her to fall in love with the bull, which then leads to the birth of the Minotaur. Do you know how that happened? And that is the symbol of the Minotaur. It's a very interesting symbol because the Minotaur is one, a sign of shame, because it constantly reminds Minos of what his wife did, that he was in a sense cocked by a bull. I didn't think I would ever say these words in a psychology philosophy stream, but there we are. And also the fact that the Minotaur in itself represents something that is quite vital, which is it's an hybrid. It's a chimera of man and beast. So it represents the civilization and the order that man brings, and also the bestiality and the violence and the unconstrained passions of the animal, of the bull. That is, by the way, the symbol of the bull. The bull is violent. It is excited by the color red, which is, by the way, a myth. It's excited by movement in reality. But this is the Minotaur. Then there's also a much more deep reading with the idea that the Minotaur in itself is a victim to its own condition. He did not choose to be born a creature and a mutant. So if you look at the myth of Frankenstein, it is also deeply inspired by the myth of the Minotaur. A lot of the things, a lot of the cultures in the Western world still derive a lot of their values and all of their teachings from these old male power fantasies. So now you know the setting. After this, the Minotaur, instead of being killed, which I would have done personally, is placed in a labyrinth. So he is, in a sense, secluded. He is hidden because he is shameful. And there is then an event that happens between Crete and Athens where the Athenians, to atone for, I think, the death of Minos' son, who was killed in battle, have to send 7 young men and women per year, the most beautiful of the city, if possible, to be sacrificed to the Minotaur. So here, the reading and the symbolism behind it is not that hard to understand. It is the act of giving the best of humanity to the worst of it to be sacrificed at the altar of a god that is, in a sense, a demon. But that's not what interests us here. The male power fantasy starts with the figure of Theseus. Theseus is the prince of Athens, and he decides that he wants to put an end to this senseless sacrifice. And so he has sent himself to Crete to enter the labyrinth, to find the Minotaur, and to kill him. And this is when the Jungian philosophy and symbolism starts to really take place. The labyrinth represents something in Jungian psychology, and that something is the unconscious. To enter the labyrinth is to enter a place where you don't know where you are, you don't know your bearings, you don't know if you're going to be able to find what you want in the labyrinth, and most importantly, you do not know if you're going to be able to escape it. The fact that there is a creature in this labyrinth is also very telling. The Minotaur represents the shadow, the part in you, in every single human, that is bestial, that is violent, and that we keep hidden. So the story of the myth of the Minotaur is the story of humanity. We each have an inner labyrinth, and within it, we each have our own Minotaur. And we are all in the same shoes as Theseus, where at some point or the other, to stop the senseless massacre, so the constant reoccurrence of these neuroses in our life, the psychic reoccurrence that makes us suffer, we must enter the labyrinth and kill the Minotaur, or rather, in our case, integrate our shadow. This is also why I said that the Minotaur is, in a sense, a deeply human figure, because it's not really his fault that he's killing people. He was stuck in the labyrinth. That is his role. He was stuck there by a king. The king who put it here because he did not want to have to face it. So it's the king refusing to face his own shadow that created this cycle of massacre. You can, of course, see that as a tale of how to not behave when you are the leader of a great city. So the labyrinth is the unconscious, the Minotaur is the shadow. And what is the thread? Because when Theseus enters the labyrinth, he has a thread with him to be able to find his way back. This is important because there is no point in going into the unconscious and facing your shadow if you cannot go back with it. So you have to have a thread. I think that the thread here represents your conscious. So it's your conscious ability to understand where you are going, what your goal is, and to come back with it. If you guys had followed the Nietzsche series that I made about Beyond Good and Evil, at some point, Nietzsche also talks about the labyrinth and the Minotaur, and he says that the vast majority of people do not enter the labyrinth, and that's for a reason. It's because once you enter said labyrinth and you come back with what you are looking for, you can no longer enter the sympathy of man because you have broken a taboo. The unconscious and the Minotaur represent a taboo. The people of Crete, the people of Athens, they were perfectly fine with the Minotaur staying where it was. The king of Athens was perfectly fine with sacrificing people. Everyone was working together to keep the taboo going, but not the prince of the Athenians, who understood the value of seeking it out and killing it, quote unquote, integrating it. So this is the myth of the superior man, the one who shows the example. And this is why Theseus is an example of a male power fantasy. And that is pretty much that. If you know the end of the myth, he enters, finds the Minotaur, kills it, and then uses his conscience, so the thread, to escape. He also bags the daughter of the king. So Minos in this story is being cucked left and fucking right. His wife fucks a bull. His daughter gets with like the king of a rival city. He loses his bastard son. Everything is going horribly for him. But that is the first one that I have. Now, and I also have a note here saying the labyrinth was built for the Minotaur. It's the same with the unconscious. One could argue that the reason why we even have an unconscious mind in the first place is to be able to hide the Minotaur. Then we're going to do a Disney story. So we're going to do Pinocchio. Or should I do Pinocchio afterwards? Nah, we're going to do it now because there are connections between the two themes. So the story of Pinocchio, this one I'm certain that you all know because you must have watched it as a kid, but I'm just still going to remind you guys because it allows me to talk about the themes and the symbols. So Pinocchio, it's the story of a puppet that was brought to life. Already, this is a Greek theme. It's the story of Pygmalion who created a statue and fell in love with it, and through his love, the statue came to life. It is the same here. But here, this is not the love of a man for a woman, this is the love of a father for his son. And this is super important. This is why, to me, Pinocchio is a male power fantasy, is because what allows the birth of a boy is the love of a dad. And what allows that boy to become a man is also the love of a dad, because you receive guidance from that man. And this is exactly the theme in Pinocchio's life. He is a puppet, and he can move and he can breathe and he can think and he can love, but he's not a boy. So this is the notion also that you are born a male, but to become a man takes work. It is possible to spend your entire life as a male, but never become a man. Pinocchio understands that to become a real boy, he has to integrate the values that makes a boy. So these masculine qualities, and he's going to acquire them through what? Is he going to just stay home? No. He is going to have to go out there and to journey to find himself. If you look at the Greek myths, it's always the story of a young man who goes somewhere. He never stays home playing video games. Apply that in your life if you will. He is guided by Cricket, Jiminy Cricket, who represents his conscience, a tiny thing on your shoulder that talks into your ears and says, this is good and this is bad. I think that it's not too hard to understand what the symbol is. And if you are to connect it with the myth of Theseus, it is the thread. The thread that allowed Theseus to find his way in the labyrinth is Jiminy Cricket in Pinocchio. And if we are to see and look at what leads Pinocchio astray, it is the cat and the fox. And the cat and the fox are Jungian archetypes of the trickster. They are, in a way, very similar to the Minotaur, in which, in that they represent the shadow self. They represent your passions, your greed, your tendency to seek pleasure. They are tempting. They are going to tempt you to do certain things. And unfortunately, of course, if you have watched the movie, you know that Pinocchio succumbs to his shadow self. He succumbs to these instincts, so he does not integrate them. And that is super important to understand as well. It is possible to do shadow work and to quote unquote lose, in which your shadow takes over and now your life becomes a hell because you are now a victim of your primal instincts. If we are to look at the story of Theseus, that would be the equivalent of if Theseus entered the labyrinth and then died at the ends of the Minotaur. So he is led astray by these two figures and he is brought to a place. And that place is called what? That place is called Pleasure Island, which is not innocent. This is what happens to people who lose themselves in their shadow. They are victims of their base instincts. And he's surrounded with other boys that will never become men because they have dedicated their lives to material possessions, to material pleasures. And so they have cut themselves off and removed themselves from the world and the realm of spirituality or the realm of the unconscious. And what happens to them is that they become donkeys. The image is also fairly obvious. A donkey is your base form. A donkey symbolically is stupid. It is just a complete idiot of an animal. This is what happens to boys who refuse to become men. Fortunately for Pinocchio, he is saved from this transformation and eventually he's swallowed by the whale. The whale, whose name is Monstro in the movie, represents the unconscious and the labyrinth. So it's a symbol of both the Minotaur and the labyrinth. And the fact that Pinocchio is forcefully swallowed is also a message saying at some point you won't have a choice. You will have to go into the labyrinth whether you want it or not. And after that, it's up to you to know if you're going to be able to escape it. Pinocchio escapes the labyrinth and the belly of the well by setting a few furnitures on fire, which is the ability of the conscious mind to reign over the unconscious by logical choices. Just like Theseus gets out of the labyrinth by following the thread, which is the thread of the conscious mind. But there is something very interesting in the belly of the well, in the unconscious. Pinocchio goes into the well to find his dad. And that to me is deeply Jungian, and this is what the male power fantasy is. This is the idea of the anima. The anima is your ability to integrate your masculine or feminine self, and both men and women have to do it. If you're a boy and you want to become a man, you have to find that masculine part. What could be more representative of that than a young boy who goes into the belly of the beast, so the unconscious, to find his dad, to rescue his dad who gave him life through his love, through his masculine love to have a son, to have a boy. And this is when you see also the values that Pinocchio had to discover when he was on his way to becoming a real boy. He discovered that things like seeking pleasure, being self indulgent, all of that took him away from that goal. And instead, the things that allowed him to become a real boy at the end was to focus on responsibility. So, taking responsibility for his actions and honesty, because he stops lying. A lie is something you perpetuate, but that also, in a sense, keeps you away from your true self because you cannot lie your way to a true self. A true self is deeply honest in that it reflects what you want. Pinocchio only lied to get out of trouble or to access pleasure, which are not in line with the values of actually becoming a boy. So that is the story of Pinocchio. You see that this is actually a movie that is worth showing to your kids. Before they're old enough to become complete nerds about Greek mythology, you can show them that movie, and even if they don't understand the themes that I just described because they're way too young, it's going to be ingrained in their brains. Okay, do we have any questions before I do the other two stories? Yes, and Sulismo also underlined something very interesting. He says it's interesting that the one that helps Theseus escape was a woman, just like the anima in Jung. Yes, this is not innocent, by the way, and you're going to see that right away because we're going to do another Greek story where the feminine allows the man to escape the unconscious. For the questions on coffee and the dreams you're sending on coffee, we'll do it at the end. Don't worry. And H, do you think thoughts are of the unconscious or conscious, or maybe both? Both. The conscious and the unconscious are surface and depth, and items float from the depth all the time, and items also sink into the depths from the surface all the time. All right. Well, does God the Creator fit into all of this? That would require another video. Don't really worry. In this book, there is a full chapter about Christianity, so we're going to talk about that. No spoiler alert for 3,000-year-old stories, my bad. Okay, let's talk now about the myth of Orpheus. And we're going to see the importance of the feminine in male power fantasy. So, for those of you who have never read that myth, the myth of Orpheus is the myth of a man who was quote unquote a demigod, who had almost magical power in that he was incredibly charming, and he had the ability through music to move rocks. His music was so beautiful that the rocks would start dancing around him. This man was an Argonaut, so he partook in one of the greatest journey and crusade, quote unquote, of Greek mythology. And he was actually the one who rescued Jason when he was caught by the sirens. So the sirens, the feminine, were becoming the male from the ship so that the ship would crash and they would be able to eat their corpses. There is, of course, a lot of symbolism in this as well. It is a message saying beware of the feminine, because as a man, this is your weakness. This is why this creature in particular takes the form of a beautiful woman to lure you in. But Orpheus, and we'll see that this is a theme with him, was able to resist this feminine attraction, and his own singing was so beautiful that it overtook the singing of the sirens. There's another version of the story where they plug wax in their ears. Not as interesting in my opinion. But that very same Orpheus, at some point, is married to Eurydice, and he is very in love, but she gets bitten by a snake. The idea of the snake being the dragon of chaos that introduces mayhem in the life of man. Even someone as perfect as Orpheus was not saved from that. Christian theology then went on to copy these themes as well. You will see that it's a straight line that starts in Mesopotamia and just never stops. Male power fantasies use the same themes because they are themes that are close to the human psychology and the animal spirit in us. But Orpheus, being who he is, refuses the death of his love and decides that he's going to go down to hell to rescue her. And hell is, of course, an analogy here of the unconscious. So this is a man that is going to go deep into his unconscious to retrieve something that is precious to him. And this is something that actually Orpheus manages. Surprisingly enough, he manages to completely charm Cerberus, who is the guardian of hell. He even charms Hades, who is the king of death, with his music. But even with all of this talent, he is not able to retrieve his love because he is warned by Hades that if he is to turn around before he escapes hell, he is going to lose his love forever. And despite being warned, when he first sees the rays of sun and he realizes, I'm out of hell, he cannot resist, he turns around and his love vanishes in front of his eyes. What is the theme here? Well, first, it is the story of a man who masters the unconscious, but who is not able to do what Theseus did, which is to use the conscious to grab the unconscious by the tail and pull it where it needs to be, which is in the sunlight. He was, in a sense, too deep into the unconscious. And so he, at the end of the day, was not able to achieve his goal. So he was obsessed with something. And this obsession meant that at the end of the day, he failed. We can also see that as the tale of a man who refused to accept the inevitable, which is that death is part of life. And instead of just being okay with that and grieving, which is it's not a great emotion to feel, but it's human and it's very healthy. He decided, no, I will go against the natural order and I will bring my wife back from the dead. His punishment was that he was shown that is not possible. That is also part of accepting and integrating your shadow, is realizing that there are certain things that are part of life that are not negative or positive, they just are, and your only job is to learn how to deal with them. But there's also, and something someone pointed out about the story of Theseus too, something that is important here, and that is the notion of femininity. Because what lures Orpheus into hell is the feminine, but most importantly, the ability that would have allowed him to save his wife is also a feminine quality that he did not possess, and that is the ability to be vulnerable. Because Orpheus refused to accept his feelings of grief and just lean into acceptance, he put himself through a journey that was doomed to fail from the start because, in a sense, he was too masculine. He was too into the action. He was too into the doing. He was too overconfident. And that overconfidence fucked him up. It would be the equivalent of if Theseus told Ariane, I don't need your thread and I'll just find my way out of the labyrinth. Well, he would have never found his way out. So it's the ability to understand also that the masculine is not enough and that it has its weaknesses. So that is the notion again of the anima. And that is the story of Orpheus. So this is our second mythological Greek story that has never happened. And it doesn't matter if it's never happened, because if you have listened to my stories, most likely you can relate to your life and it could become a very important lesson going forward for you. Now, we spoke about the anima. Let's talk about animals. Anima means soul, by the way. The Lion King. The Lion King, if you have watched any level of Jordan Peterson, you know that is rife with Jungian psychology, to the point that the people who created that movie most likely knew what they were doing. I cannot believe that this could just be by happenstance. And The Lion King is a very simple coming-of-age story, one that focuses on key themes like responsibility, but also the unconscious and the conscious. So if you look at the story of The Lion King, we have Simba and we have his dad, Mufasa. At the start, there is a very interesting scene where Mufasa shows the kingdom of the lions to his son and he says, all of the land covered by the light, that belongs to us. And the son automatically says, but what about the one that is not covered by the light? What about the one in shadow? And his dad answers, no, that does not belong to us. What is the land of light and what is the land of shadow? The land of light is the conscious, and the land of shadow is the unconscious. It's Mufasa saying, we exist in this light, and this shadow here, we do not enter because it's way too dangerous. What lives in the shadow? The hyenas, death. This is something that his dad was trying to protect him from because he saw the danger in it. But because his dad, in a sense, failed to do the shadow work to be able to say to his son, this is why we don't enter, he created a spark of curiosity in his son's mind, meaning that his son now was obsessed with the unconscious. And the uncle, Scar, knew that, and Scar, who also represents, in a sense, that shadow, tempted Simba, saying, hey, you really should go exploring because, you know, it must be very fun. Don't listen to your dad. He's just overprotective. Simba goes out of his way, almost dies, is rescued by his dad. So he's saved by the masculine, the older, the discipline that says this is good and this is bad, and he's brought back. But because of that event, his dad now is afraid for his son, and he thinks, my son gets in trouble. And that seed is planted, and Scar knew exactly what he was doing, because then there is that scene Well, Scar tells Mufasa, your son is about to die. He's in the gorge, he's about to die. Who placed him there? Him. He told him to go there for a surprise. You would think that Simba would at this point understand that Scar is not a good role model, is not someone to follow, but he's not able yet to distinguish between the land of light and the land of shadow. He lacks this ability to make gradations of values. And so he goes, his dad rescues him again and dies. This is the story of the father sacrificing himself for the son. And this death of the father is what should precipitate the birth of the man, but not in this case. Because in this scenario, Simba leaves and he turns his back to his responsibility because he is ashamed. In a way, he becomes the Minotaur and he enters the land of pleasure when he meets Simon and Pumbaa. I think that's the names that they give these characters. And he starts just gorging himself on food. He does nothing all day. He's just relaxing. This is the eternal child that Jung calls the puer aeternum, the man who refuses to grow up, despite him actually growing. His body is growing. He's becoming a lion, but deep down, he is still a cub. He is kept in a sense of arrested development. And what brings him out of that? Every single time in these stories, there's always the same theme. What brings him out of that state is a woman. He meets, I think it's Liena, I don't remember her name, the female lion that he grew up with, who is like, hey, you felt at your responsibility. And here there is a very interesting theme as well, the notion that what brings Simba to actually becoming a man is the fact that he understands that if he is to gain access to a woman, he has to become a man, because she will not give him the time of day if he stays a cub. And there is that scene where they sing like l'amour brille sous les étoiles d'une étrange lumière. And Simon and Pumbaa are looking at this like, oh, like our boy is becoming a man, because they're understanding that what they have avoided their entire life, he is doing. He's going with a woman and he will never come back. He will never be the cub that they took in and they kept a cub because it made them feel better, because Simon and Pumbaa are like forever teenagers essentially. So this is the moment where Simba is like, yeah, it's time to become a man. He goes, he confronts Scar, who is the archetype of a third leader, which is very interesting because he's gay coded. In Disney movies, it's interesting how Disney villains are always gay coded. And because of his apparent gayness, he's not able to rule the kingdom because he just completely misappropriates resources. He is just a tyrant. And tyrants, and this is the message of the Disney movie, tyrants cannot keep a kingdom alive. There's also this entire like Soyez prêt thing where he sings, and like there's like Hitlerian imagery where you see the hyenas doing the goose step. That movie is not subtle at all. It's really the dichotomy between the sun king, so the benevolent king that is for his people, and the evil dictator that is only for his own sake, for his own ego. Scar wanted to become a king because he had an inferiority complex in relation to his much more powerful cousin or brother, I don't even remember. I think it's his brother. And this is what precipitated the death of the kingdom. But, and this is quite royalist and essentialist, if you think about it, the son of a lion is a lion. So even though Simba fucked around for a few years, when he returned, he was still himself a sun king. And so he defeated Scars, he kicked out the hyenas. And what is the last scene of the movie? The shadows that now had engulfed the entirety of the kingdom are removed, and the light falls from the sky. The order is restored. The conscious is now king again, and the unconscious is pushed back where it belongs, with all of its darkness and dangers, etc., etc. So that is that. These are the 4 stories that I prepared this morning for you guys. Do you have any questions about the stories? After the stories, we're going to continue with the lecture. You could say another theme in this story is the unwillingness to look at everything in your world, your psyche. The shadow aspects of you now have the opportunity to give fruition to their own plans. Exactly. In The Lion King, the big weakness of Mufasa is that he is so obsessed with the land of light that he is like, okay, well, the shadow part we don't care about, but the shadow part is plotting against you. And this is what Jung says. You can ignore the unconscious and the shadow, but they're still there and they're still plotting, just like with the Minotaur. okay, you're the king of Athens and you're ignoring the Minotaur, but you're still sacrificing people to it, so people are still dying. This was Mufasa's weakness. And by ignoring that shadow part and that shadow, in a sense, figure next to him in life, which was Scar, he precipitated his own death. He precipitated the death of the kingdom. So this is also a message to rulers and to men in general, which is do not ignore your shadow, or else you're going to have to pay a price. Do I have to watch these streams in order, or can I watch this live before watching the previous streams? You can watch this live, it's fine. Everything is connected. How would you say these stories reflect in your life? And also, why do you think villains are queer-coded? Because they represent a part of society that is thought to be different than the norm. I think that this was a very easy way for writers back then to present a character as abnormal. But we can still look at things like Dune, for example, that does the exact same thing. The Harkonnen Baron is gay very openly, and he is queer, so he is abnormal. If you look at Leto, King Leto, Duke Leto, my bad, he is like the epitome of heterosexuality. So it's a very easy way to create something that is out of the norm and therefore potentially abnormal and dangerous in opposition to the norm and the majority. Now, I don't know if nowadays you would be able to make these allegories and these symbols, because maybe they wouldn't resonate as much. Okay. How can the shadow be understood? Is it the stuff you are avoiding, the bad habits you have? It's more complex than that, and at the same time easier. It's the things that you avoid to face. So it's the personality traits that you know you have and don't like, but ignore because you think they're part of me and there's nothing to do about it. Or maybe you don't even want to face the fact that they exist in the first place. So a habit, for example, might be part of that. Does the shadow manifest itself differently from an individual to another? Yes, absolutely. Your shadow is your own, right? It is like a reflection of you. So it's going to be exactly in line with who you are. And there are no two shadows that are the same, which is why shadow work is deeply personal. And you will not find a book or an ebook saying this is how you do shadow work. The number one step is accepting the unconscious and knowing how to tap into that, which is what I'm trying to like convey with this book. The good king of Mufasa is a bit too benevolent, failing to see the evil in his brother until it's too late. All the more need for integrating the shadow, correct? Is there a word for the part of the shadow that is addressed and processed, or is that just then the conscious? Then it becomes the conscious. This is the theme of Orpheus, who was to drag the shadow into life, into the sun. And Hades told him, once Eurydice sees the sun, then she will become real. But before that, she is still a shadow. And because he doesn't wait long enough and turns, she disappears as if she had never existed. Okay, let us continue. I'm going to drink some water because that made me parched. What's your personal experience with your shadow if it's not too personal? Well, one aspect I can discuss, for example, is lust. My shadow is mostly made up of lust. And as a young man, it created a lot of issues in my life, and it was dragging me into a direction that I did not like, but I kept ignoring it because it was tough to face, because accepting that this was part of me was accepting that I was not a good person, that I had these like impulses that I did not like because my moral compass was against them, but it was still there. And it was like actually directing my life. And so at some point, I had to do that shadow work and face that lust, understand where it was coming from, what the motives were. And this is when I was finally able to stabilize, become the man that I want, because now I'm conscious of that fact and I actively go against it. I actively resist that part of me. The part of you resist is the part of you that dies. The part of you feed is the part of you that grows and that becomes you, that becomes your true self. There is a version of NH that never did that shadow work, that is in his 30s, single, having completely senseless relationships with random women, and who is not having a good time. I'm having a good time because I've integrated my shadow. All right, let us continue. So that was the stories, and now we are going to be able to draw from these stories the more we read the book. My aim is to bring about a psychic state in which my patient begins to experiment with his own nature, a state of fluidity, change, and growth, in which there is no longer anything eternally fixed and hopelessly petrified. This is what we just spoke about. Someone asked, what is shadow work and what is the shadow? Jung is talking about it here, and he's pointing out something very interesting, which is that if you leave it to be, the shadow becomes petrified, and it becomes, in a sense, like a part of you that is attached to you strongly because you waited too long to handle that. I can say for a fact that I have met people in my life in their 50s and 60s who've had issues their entire life, ignored them their entire life. That is usually the boomer generation or the Gen X generation. And now it's too late. No amount of therapy is going to save them because their shadow has become petrified. I'm hoping that I'm catching you guys at a time in your life where your shadow is not yet petrified. In handling a dream or a fantasy, I make it a rule never to go beyond the meaning which has an effect upon the patient. I merely strive in each case to make this meaning as conscious to him as possible so that he can also become aware of its suprapersonal connections. This is important, for when something quite universal happens to a man and he supposes it to be an experience peculiar to himself, then his attitude is obviously wrong. That is, too personal, and it tends to exclude him from human society. We spoke about that, I think, in episode 1, where we said that a secret can be something that ostracizes you from the rest of society because, in a sense, by keeping that secret, you think, I am different from other men, and therefore I cannot reintegrate society. I am, in a sense, shameful for what I have inside. You become the Minotaur in a way. It is possible to become the Minotaur and to seclude yourself in your own inner labyrinth. And that is the state of paralysis that Jung was talking about. So instead, via myths and symbols, Jung is able to tell the patient, no, this is universal. We all experiment that. This is the values of the stories that I just read to you. They create a form of global human experience that removes the shame from the diagnosis and tells you we all deal with that to some level or another. And there is no shame in accepting that because accepting it is the first step to actually fixing it. We require not only a present day personal consciousness, but also a suprapersonal consciousness, which is open to the sense of historical continuity. However far-fetched it may sound, experience shows that many neuroses are caused by the fact that people blind themselves to their own religious promptings because of a childish passion for rational enlightenment. So here I have a note, and I wrote, you don't treat religious obsession, but its absence. What I mean by this, and what Jung means by this, is that there is a theme in modern society where we like to put the blame and to point the finger at people who are hyper-religious bigots, saying, look at them, they're the issue, they're completely irrational, etc. That is not necessarily untrue, but it's interesting that this oftentimes serves as a cover-up to not have to point the finger at the rest of society, which is the overwhelming majority, who also have these problems, but they don't have the excuse of religion. They don't have the excuse of they're following that book or that guidance blindly. These people are also misguided, but by what? They don't have a religion. Well, what they don't have is a spirituality. Just because you're not spiritual doesn't mean that you cannot be misguided by something. You'll just be misguided by something that you do not understand. And this is why the majority of neuroses are not religious psychosis. They're something else. This is not something that we can blame on religion. Now, I want to look at the term suprapersonal consciousness for a second. That is opposed to the term personal consciousness. So your personal consciousness is your awareness of yourself. Your suprapersonal consciousness is your awareness of how this personal awareness relates to everyone else's. And this is then what allows you to tap into the collective unconscious. I say tap, you can't really do that, but it's a form of global awareness. And that global awareness is extremely valuable because, again, it removes this sense of solitude and isolation. And you realize that, no, you are part of a whole, that we are all, in a sense, experiencing the same thing, the same human experiment, and that therefore we also are going to have problems that are very similar to one another. We are no longer dealing with questions of dogma and creed. A religious attitude is an element in psychic life whose importance can hardly be overrated, and it is precisely for the religious outlook that the sense of historical continuity is indispensable. So, first sentence, we're no longer dealing with questions of dogma and creed. We have moved past that in modern life. Most of the problems are no longer caused by that. But this idea of a religious attitude in psychic life is still very important to keep in mind and cannot be overrated. What he means by this is that what we call religion nowadays is really organized religion. But the idea that someone could, for example, follow a creed or follow dogma and not be religious is also true. Just because that person has no name to its religion and doesn't attend a church does not mean that they are not part of a court. And there are many nameless courts nowadays that create issues in people. And because it is impossible for us to then point at the supra-personal characteristics that, in a sense, create that condition, we have a tough time actually solving it, simply because they're not clear-cut religions. When Jung uses the term historical continuity, understand that he speaks about that line I was describing from Mesopotamia to today. The fact that at the end of the day, all of the symbols and the themes and the ideas and the codes that humans have always followed are more or less the same. They just take slightly different shapes. But since our psyche is tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years old, because we are a very old species, like these like 4,000 odd years doesn't account too much. If you understand the animal spirit behind it, it all really ends up looking the same, which is why I read you 4 stories, 4 male power fantasies. I could read you 40. They would all have the same themes. They would all have the same at the end conclusion. As long as I help the patient to discover the effective elements in his dream, and as long as I try to show him the general meaning of his symbols, he is still, psychologically speaking, in a state of childhood. So this is the notion, and this is maybe a little bit rude to say on stream because it's a lecture at the end of the day, but as long as you need someone to read you the stories and to tell you what is in them, the longer you stay in that state of childishness, because you need someone else to read the symbols for you. The absolute goal of Jungian psychology is for you to become your own analyst. This is what I hope you will be able to achieve. Thus, he is still in an undesirably passive condition in which everything is uncertain and questionable. So, in a sense, you are like Simba. Simba in the story of the Lion King becomes, before he becomes the king and an actual lion, when he is a cub, what is his life exactly? His life is he is being told by his dad, do this and not that. He's being told by an actual bird that he is not allowed to go there or to do that. He is lied to by his uncle. He is in a state of constant passivity, but worse than that, in a constant state of questions. He has to ask questions to people around him to understand the world. And until he gets this visit, actually, I didn't even talk about that when we spoke about the Lion King, but he eventually gets a visit from his dad and from Rafiki, who is a spiritual guide and a shaman in the Lion King, who connects him forcefully into the unconscious, saying, hey, you have homework to do here. And this is when he has this vision of his dad who says, you abandoned me, which in a way is a way to say you abandoned yourself. You abandoned your masculine energy. What the fuck are you doing? You have to return to the land of lions and you have to reclaim your throne. This is your duty. That is exactly what it means to become empowered and to start taking actions. In this condition, we must not expect any very marked effects, for the uncertainty is too great. Moreover, we constantly run the risk that what we have woven by day, the night will unravel. The danger is that nothing comes to pass, that nothing keeps its shape. So that is the risk of consuming theory and listening to guidance and then never doing anything about it. You feel good during the day, then you go to bed, and what Jung says happens. What has been woven throughout the day, the night will unravel. This is why action is so important. And I also took a note here saying, teachings only take form when followed by action from teacher and student. So that's a call of action for you guys. I now urge my patients at such times actually to paint what they have seen in dreams or fantasies. As a rule, I am met with the objection, I'm not a painter. To this, I usually reply that neither are modern painters, for which very reason modern painting is absolutely free, and that it is anyhow not a question of the beautiful, but merely of the trouble one takes with the picture. How little my way of painting has to do with art, I saw recently in the case of a talented portraitist. She had to begin all over again with pitiably childish efforts, literally as if she had never had a brush in her hand. To paint what we see before us in a different matter, uh, to paint what we see before us is a different matter from painting what we see within. So this was something that Jung encourages patients to do, to paint the dreams. And oftentimes, interestingly enough, the rebuttal that the patients would offer is, but I am not a painter. And they showed that they did not understand. What was asked of them was not to produce something beautiful or to have technical mastery. That doesn't matter. What matters was being able to put on canvas what you see in your head. And what is that? That's action. So a male power fantasy is the same. If I tell you, live up to your male power fantasies, and you answer, but I'm not a man yet, or what I do is pitiful, or it's not enough, then you don't understand. I'm not asking you to be a man, I'm asking you to become a man. And what constitutes becoming a man is also mistakes. Look at the movie of Pinocchio. He doesn't wake up and then just like does all of the right things and he becomes a man. He fucks up for an entire movie. And because of that, he understands what is good and what is bad. Without all of that journey of mistakes and errors, there would have been nothing at the end. This goes way beyond psychology and philosophy. This applies to every aspect of life. He who says, I will only start doing something if I am perfect from the start, will never start, and he will never be perfect. One, because perfection is a myth, it doesn't exist, it's an ideal. Two, because it's normal to suck at the start, and you're going to suck for a long time, just with lifting. But that is why you're going to succeed. You've heard it before, it's a platitude at this point. The man who succeeds is the man who has failed 1,000 times. The same happens here. Everyone will consider this an utterly futile sort of dilettantism. Why are you using words that I can barely pronounce? Here he is talking about the practice of painting. And dilettantism, de la dilettante, is essentially the action of doing something that is useless. However, it must be remembered that we are speaking not of people who have still to prove their social usefulness, but of those who can no longer find significance in their value to society, and who have come upon the deeper and more dangerous question of the meaning of their individual lives. To be a particle in a mass has meaning and charm only for the man who has not yet advanced to that stage, but none for the man who has experienced it to satiety. The importance of individual life may always be denied by the educator whose pride it is to breed mass men. But any other person will sooner or later be driven to find this meaning for himself. So, for the people who have missed part one, in part one, we spoke about the fact that the man that knows himself has no enemies. And we also discussed the fact that many people are perfectly well integrated in society, they have good jobs, they have families, but they're still unhappy. Why? Because they have yet to find their self. They have yet to actually integrate what they want in life and to become their true self. And here, Jung talks about that, especially for the patients of him who are following what I described as male power fantasies. Now, the term male power fantasies is, in a sense, exclusionary because it doesn't include women, but it doesn't have to. It's just that naturally, through the ages, because men dominated, the majority of literature was produced by men. And so when a man wanted to tell a story, he would tell a story from his perspective. So it became a male power fantasy. Such stories can also be found in the female canon. You just have to look. It's going to have a different nature and different teachings, but they exist. And maybe one day I'll make a video about it. Who knows? But here, to go back to the topic, when it comes to such people who have yet to find themselves, what we see too is that they tend to regard the things that would make them become their true self as futile because it does not align with the things that they used to do in the past. But think about that for 1 second. If you are not feeling fulfilled in life and someone says, try this, and your answer is, well, that's not what I used to be or what I used to do. Yeah, that's exactly the point. You are trying to become something else. You are trying to find a meaning that is not yet in your life. The only way to do that is to do something that you've never done. If you want to see a room that you've never seen, you must open a door that you've never opened before. Now, I think it is important that we stop for a second and we look at this idea that to be a particle in a mass has meaning and charm only for the man who has not yet advanced to that stage. So this is the notion that people who crave social acceptance, that's the only thing that they want. They want to be a part of that mass. And so if you are a therapist or if you are like this, then that is where all of your efforts will go. But keep in mind that once you achieve that, it's not the end of the road because most likely you will find that this was step one. To be part of society is step one. To be confident in yourself and to be a valuable part of society is step two. And this is the importance of individual lives. Jung says that this is always and often denied by the educator. Why? Because the educator tries to breed mass men for a simple reason. And actually, I spoke about that in my self-improvement video about the winter arc. All of these people who are educators of self-improvement, they tend to produce clones of themselves because it's very easy. Because you just have to pump out your own perspective and then people copy it and they become you. It's much more difficult to do it from a Jungian perspective because now it's up to the patient. The best you can be is a guide. The best you can be is someone who is going to serve as a thread to allow the person to navigate the labyrinth. But you cannot be with them in the labyrinth. You cannot tell them where to go, what to do, or how to defeat the Minotaur, because the Minotaur is a part of you that I don't know. and I don't know your inner labyrinth. So the best I can do is to show you the door of it, but after that, you are on your own. And this is not a message that people want to hear. So paradoxically, many people say, I want to become my true self, but they will only consume content or material that is going to lead them to becoming mass men because it's much more comfortable. It's, in a sense, a cookie cutter method of self-improvement that is very easy to follow because it's going to produce no result that would actually make you happy. Okay, need some water. Do we have any questions? Well, you make videos about Jordan Peterson and what happened to him. If I do make videos about him, it will be focused on his psychology and not his political inclinations. Suprapersonal consciousness is this similar to how Nietzsche understood the esoteric to see the relationship to the exoteric. You're taking it a step further where the intrapersonal is you, the suprapersonal is the ability to see the globality, and the esoteric is the ability to see the globality from above. So to place yourself above. So that's a difference in perspective. Have you read King, Warrior, Magician, Lover? No. Maybe one day. I know that a lot of people are recommending that book to me. Okay, let's continue. It should not be a question of art, but of something more, something other than mere art, namely the living effect upon the patient himself. The meaning of individual life, whose importance from the social standpoint is negligible, is here accorded the highest value, and for its sake, the patient struggles to give form, however crude and childish, to the inexpressible. So it's important what he says here because he says that this idea of the individual life is negligible from the social standpoint. Because in truth, you do not need to be an individual to have a social life. I've actually quite that the opposite is true. That the more you can conform and the more fluid and the more, in a sense, flexible you are, the more you adapt to others and the more you can have a bountiful social life. Which begs the question, is a social life and society in general not just a machine that creates people who are like one another, but no one is like themselves? I don't know if you've ever had that experience. Sometimes I was with groups of friends, and that group of friends had a clearly defined identity. And sometimes I could pinpoint that this identity was because the leader of the group had that identity and everyone else copied it. That was already bad enough. But sometimes, even worse, I could not detect whose identity it was I was seeing. And that was because it was no one's. Everyone was copying one another. Everyone was saying and speaking in a way that would please everyone else. And so everyone was a clone of each other, meaning a clone of no one, meaning that no one in the group had an identity. And that always terrified me personally as a young kid and as a young man to see that. And this is why I personally strived very early on to develop this individual life. But the flip side of this is that because of that, I have a much harder time having a social life because I stand out. This sometimes draws people to me, and at the risk of sounding a little bit, what is the term, conceited, a reflection I've gotten a lot where I meet new people is that afterwards, my wife will tell me, hey, like these people are texting me nonstop, like asking questions about you. Why? Because in that group, my individuality shined. It was truly something that people were curious about because it was something they never saw before. Sometimes people don't like it, it pushes them away. Sometimes it really attracts them because it's rare enough. But from the standpoint of having a social life, it is completely useless. But for the standpoint of having a good life and for the standpoint of becoming your true self, it is accorded the highest value. And this is why so many patients struggle with it and they struggle to give it form. If you tell someone who has no individuality and no identity, hey, make one, good fucking luck. They have no idea. No one teaches you that. I personally consider myself someone who is obsessed with individuality and with identity. Identity psychology and philosophy is my thing. But if I were to sit down and write a book about it, I would struggle because it's not the type of things that you can have actionable item lists for. The best I can do is have, in a sense, guidelines. So, for example, I would tell you have strong boundaries. That is part of knowing who you are. have very strong, in a sense, preferences, have strong principles that defines who you are. In a sense, your identity is like a castle you build for yourself that you decorate the way you want. But that is not the topic of the video. I wish to produce an effect. In the childish condition described above, the patient remains in a passive state, but now he begins to play an active part. So that is again a throwback to this action of painting. The action of painting, which by the way is symbolically a fantasy, but a fantasy put on canvas. It is very easy to have a fantasy in your head, but to make it appear in real life, that is the power of imagination, but of active imagination. This is why I've always insisted so much, for those of you who follow me and listen to me for bodybuilding advice, that you must have a dream physique. A dream physique is a fantasy. And you could say, well, surely there must be no difference between one who trains with a fantasy and a dream physique in mind and one who doesn't. I would disagree. I don't know if science is ever going to prove it, but I would guarantee you that if you have 10 men, 10 who have a dream physique and who fantasize about it, and 10 who don't, the 10 who do are going to get better results, and even more interesting, their physique is going to start to skew towards what they dream of and fantasize about. There must be a way for me to actually get you guys to do it. I've already made one video about that, but maybe like developing a mental pathway to do it more efficiently, that's actually a very good idea. But the way Jung did it is that he asked the patients to put that fantasy on canvas, and that way it's no longer just in their brain. It actually also exists in reality. And since you have managed to make it appear in reality, now you are convinced that it can be done. Likewise, I am 100% sure that if some of you guys manage to turn your dream physique into your real physique, you would by connection be convinced that you can do everything in life, because you just did something that should be impossible. You have taken the imagination and you have put it in real life. You have done what all of these stories do. You have taken something from the unconscious and you have dragged it into the conscious. That is a superpower. In a sense, it's a godlike power. By the way, this is the way gods operate. Gods say this must be, there must be light, there must be water, and it appears. So what is the power of a god? The power of a god is to make the unconscious appear in the conscious in just the snap of a finger. For man, it is more complicated. We have to put in efforts. This is why we are not divine. We are only partly divine. And my throat is giving me trouble. My bad. Okay. At first, he puts on paper what has come to him in fantasy, and thereby gives it the status of a deliberate act. This is also why, if you want a quick tip on how to become a more productive person, start to write down the things that you have to do. To have an actual list is a very potent act. He not only talks about it, but he is actually doing something about it. Psychologically speaking, it is one thing for a person to have an interesting conversation with his doctor twice a week, the results of which hang somewhere or other in midair, and quite another thing to struggle for hours at a time with refractory brush and colors, and to produce in the end something which at its face value is perfectly senseless. For those of you who are having sessions with a therapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, whatever, I'm no doctor, so I cannot tell you this is good, this is bad. What I can tell you, however, is that a good therapist, for example, would give you action items, things to work on in your life, and session to session, they would check with you saying, have you done that? And if you say no, they're going to scold you. That is a good therapist. Someone who just talks, and then nothing happens, that person is just there because you pay them hourly. They are not going to do much for you and for your life. Were his fantasy really senseless to him, the effort to paint it would be irksome. But since his fantasy does not seem to him entirely senseless, his busying himself with it increases its effect upon him. This touches upon a question I had at the start, right? Where someone asked, is it okay to be, I was going to say, is it okay to be disabled? Yes, it is, but that's not the question that was asked. Is it okay to be delusional? The answer is yes, as long as you are true to your delusion. So if your dream physique or your dream goal or whatever is delusional, and like the majority of people will tell you that's not possible, but you believe it is possible, then it's fine, because you're not truly delusional. There is a part of you that believes. It is the same with fantasy. Most likely, your fantasy will come true if you believe it is possible, because you're going to put in the effort to make it visible and to make it appear. And Jung adds, the effort to give visible form to the image enforces a study of it all in its parts. And this is the pragmatic, realistic explanation behind it. It's not just, I have a fantasy in my mind and my imagination, therefore it's going to become real if I act. No, it's because since you're obsessed with it, most likely the effort to give visible form to the fantasy in the image enforces a study of it. And so what you're going to start to do is you're going to become a student of your own fantasy. You're going to start to create an architecture of how to achieve your goal, and suddenly you have an action plan. So of course your goal is going to be successful. How could it not be successful? If you read Mishima and his philosophy is extremely close to that. Sun and Still is the story of a boy who was a boy without a body because he was way too into the intellect, and who managed to turn himself into a civilized savage, into someone who was into physical culture via what I just explained. He had a fantasy in mind, and because he was cerebral, he created an architecture of his success where he thought, if I do this and this and this and this and this, then I will finally become the man that I want to become. And he succeeded. Although I would argue that Mishima was so intelligent and so tortured by his cerebral capacities that the path that he took was very, very narrow and very, very long-winded. But that is not something that you should have to worry about. By working out a symbolical picture, he will thenceforth. Why are you using these words? He will thenceforward turn to this means of release whenever things go badly with him. In this way, something invaluable is won, namely a growth of independence, a step towards psychological maturity. This is so important, and this is the value of true self-improvement. Through your fantasy, through your hard work that gives life to the fantasy, you develop a new habit, and that new habit is a habit of activity. Whenever something in your life goes wrong, you can always recall back to what you just did and say, well, I was able to do that, so why couldn't I do this? And suddenly you become an actor in your life. People who live their life like this tend to have good lives, fulfilling lives, and they tend to be happy. People who do not do that, who have passivity as a religion and as a measure in life, when something bad happens to them, they immediately place themselves as a spectator of their own life, and they say, this is happening to me, and I don't have any recourse. So instead of saying, I will fix this, they say, this is just something that I'm a victim of, and there is nothing to do about it. This is a form of psychological childishness. This is how kids behave. Link it back, a great group, but link it back to the story of the Lion King. What is Simba but someone who has things happen to him? He is just a passive observer. He gets rescued by his dad. He gets pushed here and there by Scar. He is not actually living. He doesn't have any individual life and identity to his existence. He gets it once he becomes an adult and he gains an agency. That is psychological maturity. I must say, at the risk of sounding like a boomer, that I meet more and more people who do not have this psychological maturity. I do not know where it's coming from. I don't know if it's because society is taking up too much of the role of the protector and the father in people's lives, instead of it being their role to become their own father. But I'm seeing that. Could it be also because modern society does not want people to be independent? Because if we're independent, we no longer actually require government at the level that we require it now. I do not know, but that is actually a theory that I think is worth mentioning. So on this stream, we are trying to build independent people, as hard as it sounds, because as we described previously, it is much easier to sell people a form of dependence instead of making them independent. And also it's much more valuable, right? I could sell you methods for $50 where I just, like, in a sense, keep you subservient to me and I don't improve your life. I'm personally not interested in that. What book to begin reading Jung? Modern Man in Search of a Soul. That way you have the lectures to help you read chapter by chapter. He is no longer dependent on his dreams or on his doctor's knowledge, but can give form to his own inner experience by painting it. That which is active within him is that which is active within is himself, but not in the sense of his previous error when he mistook his personal ego for the self. It is himself in a new sense, for his ego now appears as an object actuated by the life forces within. Many people mistake their personal self and their self for their ego. But the ego is something that is attached to the self. It's just that in some pathological cases, the ego consumes the self, and now the ego replaces the self. I don't have to tell you that these people are not stable individuals. They don't tend to have very good lives. Because if your ego drives your life, the ego is a very poor driver. The ego is emotion based. The ego is not very logical. The ego is not very in the conscious or the unconscious. And so it is a poor master. What you want instead is to restore the self. And once the self regains its ability to be the reigning king in your life, you'll still have an ego. We're not talking about ego death here, but the ego is going to be kept under cage and under reign. Look at the Lion King. Mufasa is the self. Scar is the ego. This is the reason why they had completely different styles of government. And the style of government of the ego was not a good style. But Mufasa also had his flaws in that he didn't spend enough time integrating his shadow, and he might have also ignored his own ego. That is always a risk. The ego is constantly battling for control with the self. And this is why self-work and individuation is a lifelong pursuit. You cannot just get it and then be done with it. You still have to fight it because the ego is strong. And actually, the more your self grows, the more you integrate your shadow, the more vitality you have as a man or as a woman, the more your ego also increases in power. So it's a constant state of battle. And this is, in a way, life as a man and life as a woman. It is humanity, in a sense. It is this constant conflict that is within all of us. If we are to use this idea of ego and everything, we can also say that the Minotaur also, actually, no, in the story of the Minotaur, the ego is Minos. So the king represents the ego, and Theseus represents the self, who brings balance to that. We also see that in the story of the Minotaur, Minos has a horrible life because, again, having your ego as your master is the sure sign of getting cocked. I'm not saying this, the Greeks said that 2,000 years ago. Okay. That which works within him is the eternally unknown and alien, the hidden foundations of psychic life, what I just described. I cannot possibly picture to you the extent to which these discoveries change a patient's standpoint and values, and how they shift the center of gravity of the personality. It is as though the ego were the earth, and it suddenly discovered that the sun, or the self, was the center of the planetary orbits and of the earth's orbit as well. So this is also what I just described. To only live through your ego is like living in the solar system without having realized that the true center of it all is not the earth, but the sun at the center of the entire system. And there's this idea of the center of gravity of the personality shifting, which I think is very interesting because it is exactly that. Once you discover yourself and your ego becomes now an accessory and not the center of it all, your personality shifts. So sometimes you'll have a question that I get a lot is, are some people able to be fixed? Some bad people, some people who have horrible lives because they keep making the wrong decisions? And the answer is yes, because there is a chance that if they do the work to correct and shift their center of gravity, you might see that their self is not that bad. It's just that they've always been slaves to their ego. The problem is getting them to realize that. Good luck getting that done because you're talking to their ego, and their ego is jealous, possessive, it is insecure. People who are ego driven are insecure by nature. And so that suppresses the self because the self is this vulnerability. It is, again, this is the reason why I wanted to start with these stories. Always easy to link it back. What was Orpheus's sin? He was too ego driven because he had succeeded so much in his life. He was so powerful that he thought, death is nothing to me. I will get my wife back. Guess what? Because of his ego, he turned around to see his wife, as in to say, I am so great, I will rejoice in that moment. And she disappeared. Because of his ego, he was not able to get what his true self wanted. Thank you very much, Jung, for teaching us through the grave. I really appreciate you. But we have not always known all this to be so. I myself believe that we have always known it, but I may know about something with my head, with the other man in me is far from knowing, and I may in fact live as though I did not know it. most of my patients knew the deeper truth, but did not live it. And why did they not live it? Because of that bias, which makes us all put the ego in the center of our lives. And this bias comes from the overvaluation of consciousness. And this is how we go full circle. All of these stories I read to you guys, what is the common theme? The common theme is do not ignore the unconscious, do not underestimate the unconscious, because this is how you end up living a life that is ego driven. Why? Because what balances the ego is the shadow. The ego is all of these things that you tell yourself, I'm this, I'm that, I'm great, I'm superb. Your shadow is there to say, no, you're none of these things. Or maybe you are these things, but you are balanced out by me. Or you are also pathetic, miserable, cowardly, dangerous, mean, etc. An ego-driven man says, no, no, the Minotaur stays in the labyrinth and I will not face it. This is Minos. Minos with his ego saying, the consequences of my poor actions, I will hide away, I will not face. That is not a man that you want to be. You want to face that. You want to remove yourself from this obsession with consciousness that was brought forth by the modern world, and this overvaluation of it, of us modern men thinking there is only consciousness and nothing else, and realize, no, whether you like it or not, you have an unconscious part in you, you have a labyrinth in you, and you have a Minotaur. If you are courageous enough, because it takes braveness, it takes bravery to do that, to explore this, then you will be able to push your ego back. If you don't, it will stay at the center of your life forever. I have a ton of notes in the... Yep, not important. Listen up if you're young. It is highly important for a young person who is still unadapted and has yet achieved nothing to shape the conscious ego as effectively as possible. That is, to educate the will. Unless he is positively a genius, he even may not believe in anything active within himself that is not identical with his will. He must feel himself a man of will, and he may safely depreciate everything else within himself, or suppose it subject to his will. For without this illusion, he can scarcely bring about a social adaptation. Okay, we're going to have to read this. Before we read this, I'm going to go back to page 58, something that I read you guys last time, but I want to read again. It seems to me that the elements of the psyche undergo in the course of life a very marked change, so much so that we may distinguish between a psychology of the morning and a psychology of the afternoon. All right? Right now, we're talking about the psychology of the morning. And the psychology of the morning is, and I think it's here, blah, 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 blah. In the case of the young neurotic, what was once a normal dependence on his parents inevitably becomes, through his hesitation to face the world, an incest relation which is inimical to life. All right, keep that in mind because it's going to be relevant with us rereading this paragraph. So, for a young person who is still unadapted and has yet achieved nothing, you have to shape a conscious ego. So you have to educate the will. If you're young, if you're old, if you're middle-aged, it doesn't matter. You have a will. And that will is connected to your ego. That will is that part of you that says, I want this. I don't know how I'm going to get this, but I want this. We all have that. A person without will doesn't exist. A person with poor will control or with no willpower, there is pretty much only that. Now, this is a part of you that is active within yourself. And this is something that must be accepted. But it's very difficult to distinguish between the part of you that says, I want this, which is a passive will, and the active ability and skill to bend that will to your own decisions. We could separate the two and say one belongs to the ego, so the portions and the passions, and one belongs to the self, so the self-control and the self-directed will. He must feel himself a man of will, and he may safely depreciate everything else within himself or suppose it subject to his will. So, this is the moment where you come to realize the power of your will, the existence of the active and the passive will. And this is a trap that Nietzsche also speaks about, where it can become very tempting to then start to depreciate everything within yourself that is subject to the will. So thinking, for example, that there is a positive connotation to your will that you wield and a negative connotation to your impulsions and to your passions. What Jung is saying is that the two here are the same, the two facets of the same coin. And Nietzsche says that once you make that realization, this is when your youth transforms into maturity. So this is true self-control. And this takes the conscious ability to have willpower and the unconscious awareness to understand where the will comes from in the first place and what the will desires. For without this illusion, it can scarcely bring about a social adaptation. And this is the sacrifice that is necessary if you are to enter a society. This, in a sense, depreciation of the unconscious and of the passions and the portions and the ego, and the appreciation, over appreciation of the conscious. And go back to what I said previously, the reason for that is because it is much easier to enter into social environments and social norms when you do not have a too strong of a willpower, too strong of an identity, etc., etc. Now, it is otherwise with the patient in the second half of life, and now we're talking about old people, who no longer needs to educate his conscious will, but who, to understand the meaning of his individual life, must learn to experience his own inner being. I'm going to go back again. I'm starting to get very warm. So we're going to strip down a bit. And I'm going to reread to you guys page 58, just to make sure that it's still fresh in your mind. As a rule, the life of a young person is characterized by a general unfolding and a striving towards concrete ends. So what I just described with the will. His neurosis, if he develops one, can be traced to his hesitation or his shrinking back from this necessity. So the necessity to actually become aware of your own will. But the life of an older person is marked by a contraction of forces, by the affirmation of what has been achieved and the curtailment of further growth. His neurosis comes mainly from his clinging to a youthful attitude, which is now out of season. So the old neurotic is the person who clings to that will and clings to that vitality and is unwilling to let it go, unwilling to realize that with age also comes the degradation of that will, because you are supposed, and this is in a sense the arc of life, to start to slowly return into the unconscious. I said that at the start. When you are born, you are forcefully torn from the unconscious, and you are forced to become conscious. You are forced to join society. This is when you form the will. But soon enough, the arc of your life starts to end and fade. You go from a psychology of the morning to a psychology of the afternoon, and death is around the corner. And what is death if not the great return into the unconscious? And this is now the time for you to start to let go of the conscious a bit. And this also means letting go of that willpower and letting go of these temptations of this active and passive will. But it's very, very difficult because no one wants to die. And so the paradox of the human mind is to think, if I just hold onto that youthful attitude and hold onto that will, then I will keep living. And to be honest with you guys, every single person I've ever met who made it to a very old age did exactly that. They cling onto that will. So it might not necessarily even be a bad thing if done properly. But eventually, life forces you to let go. And when you let go, you pass on. You pass on to another world and another life. So let's reread this. With the patient in the second half of life who no longer needs to educate his conscious will because he already has it, but who, to understand the meaning of his individual life, must learn to experience his own inner being. So this is what we described previously, understanding the value of spirituality and the unconscious. Social usefulness is no longer an aim for him because he's already adapted. And interestingly enough, Jung also says he does not question its desirability. So it's not even a question of the person questioning why they even had to be part of that society in the first place. We are all apparently fully aware that this is something that is needed. Fully aware as he is of the social unimportance of his creative activity, so the ability to be a person, he looks upon it as a way of working out his own development and thus benefiting himself. This is self-improvement 101, where the only way to sell it to people is to tell them it will benefit you in everyday life. Look at how many young men can only be taught into improving their body through the gym by the promise of women. That is the promise of a materialistic good that you would obtain through actions and through work. Are these men improved? Yes. Are they improved spiritually? I don't think so. And I actually think that they have cut their own path because I've seen that type of man plateau times and times again because, well, they're not actually doing the thing properly. Again, that's just in my view. But oftentimes what you will find is that men who start for the wrong reasons eventually get roped into improving themselves for the right reason. Because once you start to improve yourself, you see other aspects of your life that improve, and you realize, wow, that has so much more value than what I got into in the first place. This activity likewise frees him progressively from a morbid dependence, and he thus wins an inner firmness and a new trust in himself. So it's interesting because the idea is that we fight so hard to be excited by society as a young person. We fight so hard to be fully conscious beings that we are, in a sense, forcefully pushing away the unconscious. But eventually, you come to realize that the value of this social approval was not as high as you once thought. And two, that once you can stand without it and you can have your own person outside of the group, you develop an inner firmness and new trust in yourself. This is something that I have personally experienced with older gentlemen and older women in their 60s and 70s. They are either husks of themselves because they have put all of their eggs in the conscious basket and they have come to realize that it was a poor investment, or they have not done that. They have done the transition that Jung speaks about. They were highly successful, active people in society. And then when they had to transition into the unconscious, they did it seamlessly. And they are very spiritual. They have an aura about them, an aura of calmness, because in a sense, these people are not afraid of death. They've already integrated their future death, but also they tend to be wise. And these people tend to be lovely to discuss with, whereas usually talking to an old person is very, very painful. Because in a way, you are talking to someone who you can feel should know more, should be higher than you, should have done more unconscious work, but they haven't. And so it's extremely weird. It would be the equivalent of talking to a child who is a savant, who is wise in all ways. And you think, well, that's not appropriate for your age group. Likewise with old people who like that wisdom. These last achievements, in turn, serve to further the patient in his social existence. For an inwardly sound and self-confident person will be more adequate to his social tasks than one who is not on good terms with his unconscious. So this is when we go full circle. The idea is that having to reject the unconscious to become a fully conscious person might be a necessity when you enter into adulthood and teenagehood, but it is possible. Jung envisions a world where it would be possible for that to not be so brutal, for the severance to not be so severe, and for it instead to be much more gradual and still keep a part of the unconscious in it. Because if you teach young people, teenagers in particular, the value of the unconscious, then you're going to create very balanced individual because they will not have the ego problems we spoke about. They're not going to repress their shadows. So this is something that is a goal, right? If we're talking about improving society from the standpoint of psychology, I think that is a very valid goal and something that I am personally working really hard towards doing. And here I have a note. I don't know if it's going to make any sense. We're going to discover it together. It was taken 2 years ago. Getting there requires tapping in the primitive collective unconscious to stop valuing personal consciousness. Okay, so NH from 2 years ago actually made sense. So the idea here is that it was a foreshadowing 2 years ago of what was going to happen today. For us to be able to understand the value of the unconscious, it requires taking a step back from personal consciousness and looking, for example, at these male power fantasies to understand that you are part of a globality, of a global scheme of development. And learning that as a young teen, and this is why male power fantasies are so important at that formative age, is great because, in a sense, it gives you a snapshot of the future and it gives you a path forward and it makes you tap into this primitive collective unconscious. And primitive in Jungian philosophy and psychology is not a negative term. It's actually a perfectly neutral term that just means something that precedes you, something that preceded your person and yourself, something that is of your essence. A feature common to all these pictures is a primitive symbolism, which is conspicuous both in the drawing and in the coloring. So here he's talking about the paintings that he makes his patients do to tap into the unconscious. Please know that he is also referring to these male power fantasies and these stories of old. The colors are usually quite barbaric in their intensity. Often, too, an archaic quality is present. These peculiarities point to the nature of the creative forces which have produced the pictures. They are non-rational, symbolistic currents in the evolution of man and are so archaic that it is easy to draw parallels between them and similar manifestations in the field of archaeology and comparative religion. We may therefore readily assume that these pictures originate chiefly in the realm of psychic life, which I have called the collective unconscious. So interesting. So what Jung realized is that when he asked his patients to put their fantasy and dreams on the canvas, what they produced tend to be incredibly similar to what our ancestors produced in the caves. We're talking thousands, tens of thousands of years old, and it still was present today. What does it mean? It one means that when you give no technical training to a human and you tell them express yourself on the canvas, they tend to make the same drawings regardless of their culture, regardless of the era or the millennia in which they were born. And two, that what is expressed on that canvas is what is called that primitive spirit that always is going to express itself through symbolism. We saw the same thing with the stories. Stories are paintings. It is no surprise that we are telling the exact same stories with the exact same themes 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years later. It all aligns with what the spirit needs, the expression of the unconscious. And the content of this unconscious is the collective unconscious that Jung is speaking about here. A topic that is extremely recurrent, that is oftentimes seen as this like great supermarket of ideas, and that is sometimes taken too literally, but it shouldn't be. What is argued here is simply that as humans, we have collective experiences because we live in collective environments. And so, from culture to culture, you're going to see that we all have the same ideas, the same symbols that we share, and even outside of the culture, so from the personal to the extra personal, the outer personal, there are still things that are connected. It is extremely interesting to see that, for example, Japan came up with the philosophy of Bushido, and the Greeks came up with the philosophy of Stoicism, the two being extremely similar to the point that there are certain aspects where you think, how is this even possible? Both philosophies tell men to meditate on their own death on a daily basis. There were never any contact between these two cultures, not once. So, how do they come up with the same idea? Well, because they live similar human experiences. So, they came up with similar solutions. I could tell you African tales that mimic Greek mythology that were told thousands of years earlier. There were no connections between the culture, and the people are not the same. They spoke different languages, and yet they came with the same hero story, with the same figure of evil. And this is the reason why I think that old Disney movies are much better. It's not just because I'm a boomer and I'm nostalgic, it's because old Disney movies still told these stories. Nowadays, you have a bunch of stories that no longer do that. And I think it's a shame because again, it's something that is very, very important for children. So that was for the paintings. By this term, I designate an unconscious psychic activity, so that is the collective unconscious, present in all human beings, which not only gives rise to symbolical pictures today, but was the source of all similar products of the past. Such pictures spring from and satisfy a natural need. It is as if through these pictures, we bring to expression that part of the psyche which reaches back into the primitive past and reconcile it with present day consciousness, thus mitigating its disturbing effect upon the later. We absolutely have to read that again. I wrote in the margin, male power fantasy equals paganism. Yes. And I also wrote, fix the mismatch. And we're going to explain exactly what I mean by this. So, here, the collective unconscious gives rise to symbolical pictures, the themes that we saw with these stories, and is the source of all similar products of the past. So we all draw from it. Now, what's interesting to discuss is the nature of the collective unconscious as its ability to contain, take, and in a sense, retain, because it's something that built up. Right, we are at the end of the product where now it's full of things that we don't really understand, and this is the mismatch I was talking about. See how things connect? I took these notes 2 years ago. The mismatch is this idea that we constantly in our lives face problems and issues that our unconscious is already aware of, has already dealt with, and we are just like left completely lost because our instinct, our passive will tells us this is what we do, this is what we want, but our, in a sense, ego as a modern man doesn't quite understand that. And if you allow the ego to just take over, well, you're going to be completely in the dark forever. But if you tap into the unconscious, if you actually listen to these primitive voices, if you do shadow work, suddenly these things become much more reasonable. They start to actually make sense. And so their innate nature as non-rational, because this is something that Jung describes, are now very much rational because you understand where they come from. As he says, these pictures, these instincts spring from a natural need. This is already too much to hear for most people, a natural need. The idea that there is something in us, in our psychological biology, that would make it so that we need certain things and that it's natural and therefore potentially in line with what we must acquire in life. No, we are modern men. We are separated from that. The only thing that shapes us is society. We do not have an essence. Nonsense. You are part of that line. You cannot separate from that line. And in a way, the unconscious is also your essence. It is what was there before you, before you were born, before your parents were born, before your grandparents were born, before anyone even close to living around you was even a thought in the head of their genitors. The collective unconscious was already there. So you're just another dot in that long line. It's up to you to actually become aware of that line and your place in that line, which would make your life better, and because it would bring up awareness in your life, or ignore it and say, no, I am the dot. Like anyone who does math at an advanced level knows that it's not a thing. You cannot have a dot in space. It must be connected to something else. A dot in space doesn't exist. It's like dividing by zero. Okay, anyways, I'm getting a little bit heated here. It is as if through these pictures, we bring to expression that part of the psyche which reaches back into the primitive past and reconcile it, key, with present day consciousness. The goal is not to return back to these days. This is not a call to nature saying we must return to the caves. It's saying we once were in the caves, we no longer are in the caves. How do we make it so that our past and that collective unconscious can connect with our present and makes us happier? I think that most of modern life and most of the, in a sense, the plagues, most of the suffering created by modern life is not due to modern life and its conditions. It's due to the fact that we have pretended that nothing existed before. Our ego, as modern men, wants us to believe we are causa sui. We are the first men. We are the first real civilized people. Everyone before it, prehistory, was a mistake. No, it was our past. It was what led us there. So to reconcile it and to become better as humans, more happy as humans, we have to understand that part of that humanity was also that. And this would mitigate the disturbing effects upon the later, which is the present day. The key to solve all of the mental issues we have nowadays might be to try to understand why there are mental issues in the first place. There could be many examples of this, like, for example, social anxiety. Or you live in a city with millions of people and you're surrounded by crowds all the time and you have social anxiety. What a mystery. What could it be? Could it be that maybe you did not evolve to be in that environment, and that maybe if I placed you in a like small village in a mountain with 50 people, you would suddenly no longer have social anxiety? That is part of that cure. That is part of also looking at neurosis as not just something to be cured with medication, but also with the environment. It is true, I must add, that the mere execution of the picture is not all that is required. It is necessary, besides, to have an intellectual and emotional understanding of them. They must be consciously integrated, made intelligible, and morally assimilated. So, in a way, this is what I was doing with the stories. It's not just enough for me to tell you what the stories mean. They also must become relevant to you on an emotional level, and that way they can be integrated. It seems to me to be a question of some kind of centering process for many pictures with which patients feel to be decisive points in this direction. It is a process which brings into being a new center of equilibrium. So that is the equilibrium we spoke about between the self and the ego. We might perhaps call this a new illusion, and that is valid. With null power fantasies, with the paintings, with dreams and the unconscious, could it just be a coping mechanism put in place that has no real basis in scientific literature, that exists solely to make the patient feel better? We've already established that this doesn't matter. What matters is the effect and the stimulus. And Jung confirms that by saying, but what is illusion? By what criterion do we judge something to be an illusion? Does there exist for the psyche anything which we may call illusion? What we are pleased to call such may be for the psyche a most important factor of life, something as indispensable as oxygen for the organism. a psychic actuality of prime importance. So once again, this is Jung saying your ego is completely separated from the unconscious, and the ego might tell you, we don't need such things. They're not tangible and therefore they're not real. But the unconscious says, I don't really care if they're real. They're necessary for my good functionment and they're necessary for your mental health. So whether you want to apply reason to this and say it's a thing or it's not a thing, it matters not. Presumably, the psyche does not trouble itself about our categories of reality, and it would therefore be the better part of wisdom for us to say everything that acts is actual. And in this very scientifically minded and oriented new modern world that we have, I think this is a mindset that is actually very good. Everything that acts is actual. Instead of splitting hair, speaking semantics, saying, well, this is not proven or this is that. Does it act? Then it is actual. Afterwards, you can argue if you want to about is it real? That is not really an interesting question, at least not in the field of psychology. He who would fathom the psyche must not confuse it with consciousness, else he veils from his own sight the object he wishes to explore. On the contrary, to recognize the psyche, even, he must learn to see how it differs from consciousness. It is highly probable that what we call illusion is actual for the psyche, for which reason we cannot take psychic actuality to be commensurable with conscious actuality. So your ability to consciously be aware of your psychic activity does not make the psychic activity, because there are underlying psychic activities you're not aware of. Does it mean that they don't exist? No. To the psychologist, there is nothing more stupid than the standpoint of the missionary who pronounces the gods of the poor heathen to be illusions. But unfortunately, we keep blundering along in the same dogmatic way, as if what we call the real were not equally full of illusion. In psychic life, as everywhere in our experience, all things that act are actual, regardless of the names man chooses to bestow on them. I love the analogy where Jung says and speaks about the missionary who pronounced the gods of the poor heathen to be illusions. The idea being that one, a missionary of any religion, would enter into a primitive society with their own spiritual baggage and say, oh, your spiritual baggage does not align with mine. Mine is superior. It must mean that yours is bullshit. This is exactly what happened to the animist, quote unquote, primitive religions of Africa that were wiped away by the one God religion of Christianity. They didn't really have a choice. They were told, your ways are savage ways and are not civilized. We're going to replace it with our ways. Their ways were engineered through thousands of years. You think it didn't have a purpose? It had a purpose. It was tied into the social economic context of these countries. And it's no surprise that these countries are doing so poorly nowadays, because the structure, the spiritual structure, the unconscious structure that was underneath it all was removed from under their feet. And now the tribal system that used to work has been replaced by a democracy, but a democracy that is based on what? On a spirituality that they barely acquired. So is it any wonder that times and times again, war occurs and these people and these democracies are replaced? This is just the natural path of their past unconscious that just recurs. And if we are to understand history, historical continuity, then we have to tap into this collective unconscious that is very valid for them, but might not be valid for someone who does not understand that history. There is a full chapter about this. Jung has a full chapter about primitive man in Africa that is fascinating. And I really do think that for this chapter, I'm going to make a full video because there's so much to say and I want it to be clean that I want to be able to edit it out. So this might be one chapter we're going to eventually skip. And then we finish the chapter. We are at the end of our lecture. The various technical terms and the changes rung upon them never touch the essence of the process described above. He's here talking about the development of psychology. It cannot be encompassed by the rational concepts of consciousness any more than life itself. It is because they feel the whole force of this truth that my patients turn to symbolical expression. In the representation and interpretation of symbols, they find something more effective and adequate to their needs than rational explanations. So when rational explanations, material standpoints, stop being actual, you have two choices. Either you say, well, there is nothing beyond that, so I'm fucked, or you say, I will turn towards the spiritual. I will turn towards the unconscious. In the stories that we read from the Greek heroes in the Disney movies, the solution is always in the unconscious. And in most people's lives, if you are well acquainted with social life and you are well adapted to society, your problem, your minotaur, is most likely in the labyrinth. He's not hiding in the cabinet, he's not under your bed, he is in you. And so it is your best interest to start to look into it via shadow work and via the male power fantasies. The male power fantasies can be that guide, that in a sense, that path, that fil d'Ariane that you'll follow to be able to make your own visit into the labyrinth to become your very own Argonaut. But that is that. And I'm going to finish with a note that I took underneath. Psychology is one such thing. By attempting to turn it into a science, you lose on mysticism, an integrated part of studying humans. Because, yes, humans are mystic. We are mystic apes. This is why we are so advanced, because we have an unconscious. And I would argue that the rest of the animal kingdom does not have an unconscious. But that is that. That is the end of the lecture. And I love the fact that it's 2 hours sharp. Sharp. Perfect. That is exactly the point where I wanted to stop. And then next time, we're going to do a psychological theory of types. So we'll go from knowing yourself to male power fantasies to how to build your character via the psychology of the theory of types. But that is going to be in a while because this is the last philosophy stream for the month of December. I don't know how many I'm going to do in January. There's going to be a big project announced very soon, and it's going to be super busy for me in January. So I hope we'll get. I will do my absolute best to get 2 Jung streams for January, but no promises. That being said, my absolute goal going forward, is to make so that every single Wednesday we have a philosophy lecture, so that we can really start to move. Because this, realistically, we have boom, boom, boom. We have 11 chapters in that book. So realistically, we'll get a bare minimum of 7, 8 Young sessions that'll take 2 or 3 months. And there are so many authors I want to cover. Dostoevsky, of course, Nietzsche again, Mishima. I also want to, at some point, unveil a right-wing book club that is going to be very controversial, a left-wing book club that is going to be much less controversial, where I'm going to cover like Marxist authors like Evola. We're going to do like Bronze Age Mindset, all of the books that no one wants to touch because they're too controversial. I want to actually cover them with you guys on the channel. So that's that. That is for the Young lecture. Now, someone asked, are we going to get the dream analysis? Absolutely. The next hour is going to be pure dream analysis, pure answering questions, and that's through the coffee. So right now I'm going to stand up and use the bathroom because I'm about to piss myself. Did I hear Evola? You did hear Evola. So use that time to also use the bathroom or drink something. Put your questions in the coffee page. Put the questions in the chat, and I'm going to be right back. Yo, we are back. Parfait. All right. So that is the interactive part of the stream. If you are watching the replay for the lecture, it's over. Did you wash your hands? No? Of course I didn't wash my hands. I'm French. So let me check the coffee to see if you guys have dreams for me to analyze. Up. Up. Okay. Oh, we have plenty of questions. So let's see. We have Abai, who asks, earlier in the text, sorry, I know you are very ahead. What did Jung mean by the difference of what and why? Page 7. This view of the question results in the causalistic approach. It's a very good question. Let's see. Well, first off, do we even have the same edition? It would have been greater if you gave me like a bigger paragraph, because it's very hard for me to find one sentence. Because like causalistic approach brings back, like give me the actual paragraph, because this is very hard for me to actually find. We're going to go into the dream. So we first dream analysis that we have, and to in a sense, what is the coffee page? The coffee page is the link that you see in the description if you want to support the channel or send questions. So the first off, before we start the dream analysis, last time I had a half-hearted attempt at using a dream dictionary to find symbols, and it was pretty fucking useless, because what I found is that it's not needed. And so we're going to do it in the true Jungian school of tradition, where we're going to like just use what we perceive and not rely on other people's symbols. So let's begin with Karim. Karim sent a dream. I enter a dim room. My dad's side of the family is on the couch. I begin to leave without saying a word. Muhammad, my dad's cousin and the man who works for him, asks me, aren't you going to take Sharif, my brother with Down syndrome, with you? My father used to make me drive my brother home to my mom's, and this was expected of me growing up. I curse Mohammed out in Arabic by saying, Kus Umak, your mom's. Then I flick him off with multiple fingers, unsure of which one is the proper Egyptian cursing finger. Cursing, I was about to say. I simply laugh off my own ignorance and walk out the room. I quickly leave the room and approach my car. I have the distinct feeling of being chased by Gassir, Muhammad's 10-year-old son. I get into my Mazda and start it. A ginormous amount of brown cement like substance falls from the building undergoing construction. All the streets are flooding with this brown mud like substance. I'm driving and begin to hydroplane. I see children in the mud and wonder if I should stop. I think to myself, I might hit a child, and then I do. I get out the car thinking it's Gassir, the little boy. It turns out to be a girl. She reminds me of my little sister. I call a hospital. They tell me the ambulance can't make it to where I'm at. I look at the child. It seems that despite hitting her, she's in great condition. An Egyptian family that I intuit to be her family is nearby. The family and the girl offer me to come inside and eat fish. I check Google Map to see where I'm at. I'm in my little stepsister's city in Egypt. Okay, so then you send your own interpretation. Before that, I'm going to give you mine. So first off, the dream is clearly family themed. You are in a room with your dad's side of the family. Now, from what you are giving me, you seem to have a big family, and there seems to be some level of separation between the members of the family, where apparently your mom lives somewhere else. You have a difficult family situation because you have a brother with Down syndrome, which in a way is a blessing, but is also seen as difficult. You have an uncle, and the first thing that is demanded of you is for you to take care of your little brother. So for you to step up and take up responsibility. And your response is to cuss out the person that is asking you to do that, who is like a father, a masculine figure in your life, and telling him your mom. I think the insult is not innocent here. It's a family related insult. That's interesting. And in your attempt at flicking him off, you cannot find the proper finger. So it shows that you are, even in your attempt at, in a sense, being disrespectful, there's still a part of you that doesn't want to do that in the dream. And then you leave the room, so you flee. So part of your spirit understands that what you did is not proper, even in the dream. And you leave with a car. So you try to get away as fast as possible, but you feel like you are being chased by a member of your family, the son of your uncle, from what I understand. So even when you are trying to run away after disrespecting your family, it still feels like it's coming after you. You get into your car. The fact that the car is American is interesting. You say that you have identity struggles and that your family is Arabic and you flee your family in an American car. Could it be maybe part of your subconscious telling you that you're starting to move away from your roots and that you're becoming Americanized? That's a possibility. It's a very real situation that many immigrants, Asian and Arabic immigrants especially, encounter when they move into the US, where they live in the US now, so they become Americanized, but then they go back home and they feel like, in a sense, a foreigner in their own land. And when you attempt to run away, what happens? A ton of brown substance is flooding out of the streets and preventing you from leaving. Keep in mind that brown substance is produced by your subconscious. So it's in a way something that is telling you what you're doing is wrong, and it's trying to slow you down. And the fact that it's mud, in particular, the mud is usually negative. It's a negative symbol. It's dirty. It's also the sign of a dirty conscience. You think that you are going to hit a child, and you do. You hit a child just before you are in a conflict with your family about taking care of your brother. So the fact that you're running away, in a sense, creates suffering and hurt in another child is the sign that you running away from your responsibility is negative. This is what you're telling yourself. And when you try to get an hospital to take care of the child, they tell you we cannot help you. So the child becomes your responsibility. So you attempted to run away from taking care of your brother, and you're still at the end of the day put in care and in charge of a child. But because you couldn't have handled or stomach a child being hurt, the child is perfectly fine, and the family invites you to hit with them. So in a way, it's your own brain saying, "Okay, you did something bad, but at the end of the day, no one was hurt." So it could also be a way to say, "What you have done and you turning your back to your family has no direct consequences yet, but it will if you continue." Now, let's look at your interpretation. The dream starts with a confrontation with my father's side of the family. The shadow here is projected into my cousin who works for my father, a narcissistic tyrant who is physically and verbally abusive towards his family. This cousin worked to disinherit me of my inheritance and sever the relationship between my father and my sister for the first 10 years of our life. So that was context that was not given. But the fact that you chose the uncle as the, in a sense, the figure that you would confront and insult now makes a lot of sense because it's someone that you do not like. So you perceive him as someone that is in opposition with what you want to do in life. I have ceased talking to my father and that side of the family. Okay, so that's the family conflict that I was perceiving as the theme. The void left has put me in the position of feeling responsible for this sister upbringing and protecting her from the shadow of my father, who still enter her life for a few weeks each year on annual visits to Egypt. This could explain why the child that you hate but do not kill is a girl. Typically, these visits end with cursing our existence for not showing him enough love. I realize I'm inadequate to serve the role of a male figure in the girl's life. This is why you call the hospital. I do, after all, hit the inner child with a car. So you perceive that as your inner child. Okay, that's interesting. I believe the theme of brother, sister, and my own inner child are interlinked in a network of wounds. This dream is about the struggle with the father's shadow and how I can't bring my sister to the hospital and how I've remained in this agitated state towards the injustice we've incurred. The dream does seem to speak to a state of conflict that is not resolved within you. It's not the conflict with your family because that is always going to be part of life if you have a family, but you can choose to go past that or not. The ending is revelatory in the sense that I am being offered food, nourishment by a new family, which seems to be recurring in the later stage of my analysis. Yes. So the end of the dream, oftentimes the end of a bad dream is something that you desire and makes you feel better upon waking up. The introduction of the psyche is archetypal family structure as modality of healing from the past family. Correct. The dream has 3 levels of narrative. The macro level is the narrative of returning my brother. The middle level is the narrative of confronting my father. And the personal micro level is this car accident with the girl, insinuating that the way I confront my father and the shadow will lead to behavior that is injurious. I think you did a beautiful job analyzing your own dream. and that is the level of depth that we all must aspire to understand ourselves. And for some reason, the camera has decided to start going crazy. Okay, that is a great. Thank you for sharing that with the stream. Okay, I think this is Abai. Okay, perfect. Thank you, Abai, for sending me the link. So this brings me back to the Freudian view. Yes, it's exactly here. Okay, so what you want to know is the causalistic. This brings me back to the Freudian view mentioned above, that for the purpose of therapy, it is necessary for the patient to become conscious of the causal factors in his disturbance, a view that is little more than a survival of the old theory of the trauma. I do not, of course, deny that many neuroses have a traumatic origin, just like we've seen with this specific dream of Karim. I simply contest the notion that all neuroses are of this nature and arise without exception from some crucial experience in childhood. This view of the question results in a causalistic approach. Okay, so this is what you wanted me to explain. What he means by this is that if you think that every single neurosis must come from childhood, then you have now a causalistic approach to the question of neurosis, which is a cause and effect. So every single time a patient will come to you with a neurosis, you will think it must originate from childhood. And so you will find something in the patient's childhood that is going to justify the neurosis. And that is the weakness of a causalistic approach, because oftentimes the problem that made the neurosis arise is somewhere else. We saw in Karim's dream that it's both childhood and adulthood problems that create the neurosis that manifests itself in the dream. A Freudian view of that dream would have not resulted in a complete analysis because it would have missed some of these parts. Very good questions. If you have at any point a part of the text you don't understand, please bring it to the stream. It's the perfect place for that. Okay, let us continue with more dreams. I must say, guys, that I really, really enjoy these streams. It is really a good time. Up, so we have Stronk. Hello, NH. I have a series of dreams for you to analyze. I have been having these nightmares wherein I am the terrifying part. I do things that I would never even think of IRL. Dismembering a little disabled girl. These are quite vivid, always ending in sleep paralysis. Let me see if you sent me more information or if this is the extent of what I have to work with. Okay, this is the extent of what I have to work with. So we spoke last time about that and the fact that oftentimes you will do things in your dreams that you would never dream of doing in real life. And I said that this should not be seen as a sign of an impending psychotic break of you becoming violent. If anything, it is your brain, your unconscious mind, deloading all of these things that you find aberrant in a non-active way, in a passive way in your dreams, in a way to show you your shadow and say you are able to do this. Look at what it would be like. Look at how it would make you feel, so that in your conscious life you stay on guard and you do not engage in these things. I would tell you to really resist the feeling of shame and the urge of, in a sense, blaming yourself for these dreams. If anything, they are the sign of a healthy psychic life. It would be a different thing if you repressed these dreams. Up. Okay. We have Banana Boom that says, sorry if this question is irrelevant, but what are your thoughts on the Luigi Mangione situation? It's an interesting question. It's what can I even say about that? That won't get the stream tagged as terrorism. I would say that outside of any context or any blame, someone who has denied coverage for tens of thousands of people and who is responsible for death and suffering gets what they get. That's it. I will not say more. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, and then we have a bunch of questions. So we have Chris C. Bro, it's a question about lifting. I will answer it in due time. This is a stream about dreams. Okay, that's also a question about lifting. That's a question about lifting. Okay. We have Loanis, who says, hello NH, here is a dream for the dream analysis. So I was at some kind of a cafe bar. I paid for my drink or meal, don't remember exactly. and walked out towards my car. It was dark and my car was parked very far away, while there were no lights. As I was walking, I noticed two guys around my age, maybe younger, following me. I do martial arts and can defend myself, so I didn't pay them any attention and kept walking. When we were further away from the lights and the bar, they stopped me and pulled out a gun, demanding I give them my money. I hesitated for a moment, thinking I would totally beat them up, but decided not to risk it and gave them my money. I had only like 40 euros on me, so it wasn't worth the trouble. They left and I felt relieved. I stood there and watched them leave, then fell on my knees. Thank God nothing bad happened, and looked up to the moon that go out of the clouds. While I was looking, I saw an angel in armor fly by it, probably Archangel Michael. And then a moment later, I saw another light coming from the sky and saw Jesus looking down on me, his hands slightly outstretched. That was the dream. After I saw Jesus, I woke up fully awake and crossed myself. For info, I'm 22, Eastern Orthodox Christian, do martial arts. Thank you for all of the great content. You're a treasure. That's very nice. Also, what are your thoughts on Epictetus? Okay, first, your dream. So, the dream is fairly straightforward and simple. You go out to have a good time, as you are allowed to do, and you walk out towards your car and it's dark. The darkness is already a sign of danger, right? It is the inability to see the threats that are hidden in the shadow. And your car is parked very far away where there are no lights. So it's interesting that the vehicle that would bring you to safety is in a place that requires you to take risks. As you are walking, you see two guys around your age that are following you. So in the dream, you are conscious that there is a danger, but your ego tells you, I do martial arts and I can defend myself. So you don't pay enough attention to them and you keep walking. So you give these people in your dream an opening because, and this is not just in dreams, in real life as well, it's a tip for you guys. When people want to mug you, they oftentimes follow you until you enter a place where there are not a lot of people and no lights. They never mug you when there is lights or activity. So if you are followed, do not go where it's dark. Stay in places where there are a lot of people. These types tend to give up very, very quickly. They will move on to a new victim. Just a tip. But you don't do that because you are ego driven in your dream. And so you are walking further away, you give them an opening, they stop you and they pull out a gun and they demand you give the money. You hesitate. So your ego is still like, okay, we made bad decisions after bad decisions, but maybe we could make a third bad decision that is even worse than the rest and try to beat up people with a gun. But your conscious self and your reason tells you no, it's not worth the risk. Why the fuck would I risk my life for 40 euros? It's not worth the trouble. You give them the money and they leave. So it's a process of also like it's problem solving in a way where these people could represent the shadow and they come at you with a quote unquote reasonable ask, and your ego could be the thing resisting the shadow saying, I will not do that. But your conscious self, your reasonable self says, no, that is a valid demand. And this is something that we can do to be safe. And so you do it. And once you do it, you stand there, you watch them leave, you fall on your knees and you thank God. So this is also an act of rejecting your ego. You are, in a sense, giving praise to God, which outside of any religious mindset or anything, is you outsourcing the in a way the praise that you should receive yourself, and that is extremely humble. And you look up at the moon, so you look up towards the spiritual, you look up towards like the higher realm of your own existence and your own conscious. And it's a full moon. If it's a full moon, this means that there are very little clouds. You are able to see the full moon. And as you're looking, you see an angel in armor. So the angel in armor, in a sense, could also represent you. It represents combativity, but not just combativity. Combativity with also the ability to be kind and understanding. And then after that, you saw Jesus, and Jesus stretches out his hand. Jesus, in your collective unconscious, the Christian collective unconscious, is the man who sacrificed himself on the cross, the man who allowed others to do great violence to him in order to save the world. From a Jungian perspective, Jesus is the one who faced the global shadow of humanity for the benefit of us all. He died so that we wouldn't have to deal with that evil. And this is why he's outstretching his hands to you, saying, my son, you have done what I would have done. So you are a true follower of Jesus. And then you wake up, you cross yourself. And I think that is a great dream. It's a dream that is teaching you a lot about yourself, about your values, and about what you want in life. How to donate in coffee if there are not enough characters for the dream. You do a donation, you write dream, and then you send me a private message. This is the entire point. You can send as many messages as you want once you have the private message. Very good dream. Thank you for that. Okay, then we have True Viking Heart, who sent lots of dreams. So True Viking Heart, I'm going to start with dream 1, then I'm going to move on to other people to give them a chance. But if we have time, I'll get back to you. Dream 1, a semi coworker, what even is that, who I'll call S, is really smiling at me whenever she sees me, and I go through a door, and she puts her hand on my back and shoulder. What the fuck is LL? Okay, well, L, who is another girl, sees this and rolls her eyes, and I know that L and I are together, so I cannot try to make any moves on S. Okay, so your dream starts. A girl is putting the moves on you. Another girl that you are already with is like, what a bitch. And so you're aware of that. You're aware of like the fact that there are two women fighting for you. Then I found out that I'm not only together with L, but we're married and we have 2 kids. When I realized this, I completely crumbled because I realized that I fucked up just like everyone else, and I already have 2 kids from somebody I don't even care about. And now I can't just break up anymore because even if I do, the kids will still be there. Then I ask Elle how the fuck we even managed to stay together, and she says, well, we hardly and bitterly made it work somehow. Then we break up, the end. I think it's a straightforward dream that relates to your relationship towards love. In the dream, you find someone that you like, that smiles at you, and you're like, hey, I want to put the moves on her. But there is another woman that is going to serve, in a sense, as a restriction where you are already with her, so you cannot get what your heart truly desires. And on top of that, it's not just that you're with her, you have kids. So it's an obligation. I see this woman as a symbol of responsibility. But responsibility in your dream that turns into a nightmare because you did not choose it. So this is, in a way, the archetype of the man who never actually did any of the things that we spoke about in the first part of the video, never actually integrated his unconscious part, and just lived life like a robot without paying attention. And he wakes up one day realizing, wow, my will and what I've done with my will led to a terrible situation for me because it was never my will. It was a passive will instead of an active will because I never put in the work. This is your fear. You fear becoming that man. You fear waking up one day realizing I have fucked up and now I have baggage and obligations. But at the end of the dream, you still break up. So, as always, the dream always shows you that yes, this is a difficult situation, but there is always a way out. Because in reality, even if you had 2 kids, and this is someone who is a child of divorce who tells you that it's always better to have 2 parents that are apart instead of 2 that are together and bicker and fight all the time. The best being, of course, to pick the partner that you're going to be with for the rest of your life and have 2 parents who are in love. But apparently nowadays, it's too much to ask. So that was for dream number 1. And then you tell me that your parents divorced when you were 4 and you don't even remember them being together. So that could be a trauma informed dream in a way where it's a representation of what you've suffered. You don't want to impose that on other kids, but you're definitely afraid of doing that. I'm in the exact same boat. Good news is that if you find a good woman and you do your homework properly, it will not happen. I'm going to come back to you afterwards for more dreams. But we have Alemanic Perv who has a dream who says, I'm working with my coworkers. For some reason, I take my hour lunch to go swim, look down and realize I'm wearing a Speedo. Well, you're German, so of course you're wearing a Speedo. Coworkers make fun of my Speedo. I went off and did my own thing. I leave my workout and get dressed again. I see my buddy chasing a car. I join in. Are you a dog? My police vehicle morphs. Okay, so in a car, so you don't just chase the car like a savage on 2 feet. My police vehicle morphed from a Ford Explorer to a crappy old Mustang Interceptor from the 80s. We chase the car to a pyre, then driver gets out and runs. We can't find him. Next thing, my friend calls over the radio that he found the driver and he has a gun. I rushed to help my friend, woke up after I saw people running and heard gunfire. Okay, well, this is this is what I would call a very nonsensical dream, in that it's very hard for me to even like take one theme out of that. You know, it's usually the dreams that work the best for interpretation are the ones with a cohesive theme, and the ones that morph into other things constantly tend to not be that. So it could just be that it's just whatever your unconscious wanted to like share with you that's completely jumbled up, and I cannot make it out. Do you guys in the chat have any interpretation for that? it I think that the one theme that I could see here is you are trying to get something done and there's always something that gets in the way. So you try to swim and you have a speedo so people make fun of it, so you leave. You try to chase someone and your car changes into something else, so you can't do it. You get to a car to a pier, but the driver gets out and he runs. You can't find him. Then you find a lead. You rush there to help your friend, and you're woken up before you can solve anything because people are running and there's gunfire. I think that if there is one thing I can say about your dream is that it speaks to maybe a fear of constant change and a fear of not having the ability to get what you want done because of the constant evolving nature of life. So that might be a dream that speaks about your fear of change, change that is outside of your control. But I'm really grasping at straws here. Okay. Then we have Balalaikai, who sends dreams that happen in the same night, and these tend to be interesting for the very reason that I just outlined. First dream: I dream that I'm helping a friend work on my dad's car engine. It is my job to make sure a few of the parts will fit. My buddy hands me the parts, and after he hands them to me, I immediately lose them. We go to my dad to tell him this, and he seems completely unbothered at the news. I later come to find the parts much later on in that same dream, and it is no longer relevant. So, usually in a dream, when you try to do something and it looks rational and you're not able to, like for example, you're trying to write a paper, but for some reason you're always staring down at a blank page, that is in a way for your unconscious to, in a sense, express your fear of the inability of getting things done even when you will them. And we spoke about that in chapter 3, at the end of chapter 3. Well, this is a recurring theme with people who are psychologically immature, where they have lost the very belief in their ability to materialize their imagination in real life. Well, that is exactly what that dream is telling you. You are trying to do something that is extremely like normal and easy to do, and yet the parts just keep disappearing. You also fail your body and you fail your dad. So it's not just that you cannot get stuff done. Oftentimes in these dreams, it connects to the fear of failure and the fear of disappointing the people around us. And in the dream, your dad seems completely unbothered at the news. So this could be either the sign that you perceive that your dad is not paying enough attention to your successes or failures. It's something that I've seen with kids where sometimes kids will fail on purpose. Actually, there's a great movie about that, about chess. I don't remember the name, but it's a movie about chess where there is a kid that is a genius at chess, and at some point he starts to lose games on purpose to see the dad's reaction because the dad is super invested in his chess career. And when he starts losing and the dad loses his shit, the kid tells himself, "Okay, so you only really love me because I'm good at chess." And the dad, thankfully, in the movie, that's a great movie. I need to find the title. If you have it in the chat, let people know so that they can watch it. But the dad eventually realizes he fucked up, and he tells the kid, "Hey, from this point on, chess must be something fun," and our relationship is mended. So this is maybe what's happening here, where you felt that way towards your dad, and so in a way, in the dream, you're on purpose losing the pieces so as to see how he reacts, and because he's unbothered. Either it's telling you, okay, he's cool with it and I can fail, or you're telling yourself, well, he's not actually implicated in my life. Because you end up later finding the parts and it's no longer relevant. So it shows that the task you were doing with your friend had no importance in itself. What mattered was the symbolic behind losing the parts. Then second dream, I dream I am in a room with a single door which is impossible to go through. Same theme, your inability to do something that should be easy but that you cannot do and you cannot explain why. And then third dream, and this is again, I know enough of you to know that you're someone who's very driven and very well accomplished in life. So it's interesting to see that in your dreams you are the opposite of that. And then third dream, I dream that my friends are being pursued by vampires and I set out to protect them. I end up falling short and I watch my friends get killed. The common theme of these three dreams is fear of failure, fear of not living up to the potential that you set for yourself or that you want to accomplish for the people that love you. Searching for Bobby Fischer. Yeah, it's such a great movie. If you like chess, go watch that movie. Thank you for the dream. Yeah, finding Bobby Fischer. Okay. Agreed. I saw your question. I will answer it, but it's not the stream for that. And this is okay. We have SDK who says, "Hello, thank you. I was the leader." So this is the dream. "I was the leader of some sort of revolution between two sides. I had my team that was close to me and of high rank. We went on several missions in order to gather something we needed. Only this time, something went wrong in the undercover mission, and I needed help to fix it. We were in some sort of waiting room with other members of the revolution. It was like they were onto us and buying time. I remember pacing up and down, thinking I needed to reveal myself and give myself to save everyone. Then suddenly, tons of people on my side showed up and helped me, and we won. After this, I was in a big field." Okay, so let's start with this part of the dream. So you're the leader of a revolution between two sides. So you have a responsibility towards your team. And you go on missions to retrieve something that you need. Okay, basic, primitive human emotion, tribalistic, and resource oriented. Something goes wrong and you need to fix it because if not, you're not going to be able to retrieve these resources. And you are in a waiting room with the other members, so you are all together. So your responsibility is directly engaged here because your man could potentially die if you fuck up. And you pace up and down, and you think, "I need to reveal myself." So you think, "I need to sacrifice myself for the good of everyone," but you don't do it. And instead, tons of people show up that are on your side and they'll help you, and you win. So this could just be you failing to sacrifice yourself, but in a sense, your dream telling you sacrificing yourself would have been an act of ego. And by waiting and being more conscious, you allowed more people to show up, and then the victory was easy. Whereas you could have sacrificed yourself for nothing. After this, I was in a big field and everyone was celebrating with their friends in the revolution because you won. I realized that I couldn't find friend A and that friend B was happy with his other friends. I just remember smiling and finding a chill place on the little hill to look out over. So exactly the same scene in Berserk when Casca and Guts look over the scene of the Band of the Oak. I was happy that everyone else was happy. It felt peaceful, as if my work was complete. In the scent of the Band of the Oak, it's the same, except that Guts rightfully points out that this happiness is temporary and dependent on Griffith, and that they're all playing a huge risk because the fire that they're warming themselves to, Griffith, could also turn into a brasero and kill them all, which was eventually prophetic. Friend B came and found me and put his arm around me. Others came to congratulate me too. Okay, so that's after you failed to sacrifice yourself. It turned out to be a good thing because everyone is happy. After I was alone on the hill, I decided to take a pill that reset my memory, as it was clear I needed a fresh start, and everyone else was already living their best lives. They were shocked, but it was the right thing to do. I took control and hit the reset button basically. My mission was complete, people were happy, so I moved on. Okay, that's very interesting. Because in the moment where Casca and Guts, I'm sorry that I related to Berserk, but for those of you who know that scene, it makes a lot of sense. When Casca and Guts look over the Band of the Oak, Casca and Guts are not happy. Casca thinks she's happy because she's following the person that is her master in life, Griffith, which ends up being a horrible decision that she made. Guts is consciously unhappy because he realizes, oh, what I'm doing here is I'm just melting my identity with the collective because it's comfortable, instead of doing what we spoke about in today's lecture, which is finding who I am and potentially isolating myself, which is something that he ends up doing. Of course, I'm not surprising any one of you when I tell you that Jungian philosophy and psychology is huge in Berserk. Actually, I could make a full video called a Jungian analysis of Berserk. There are many videos I want to make. There's just not enough hours in the day. Maybe it could be a stream, actually. Who knows? It could be a stream, actually. I could make a stream. Well, we'll think about that. Okay. But to get back to your dream, at the end of it all, you find yourself alienated from that group of people that you helped make happy because you yourself are not happy. And so, since you feel like you're no longer needed by them, and maybe even you think that you staying with them is a hindrance to your own development, you reset. I think that it's no mystery that so many people say that self-improvement makes you a new person. What you do here is a form of self-improvement. You let go of the past to become the person that you want to be. How many of you have heard the saying, if you want to become a new man, you have to kill the old man. You have to kill the boy to become the man. That is essentially what you did. Instead of clinging to other people's happiness, or instead of just living in the past, you decided to wipe out the past and take control, as you put it, and reset it. So I think that's exactly that. I think that this is a positive dream that is fairly straightforward and easy to understand once you read it through the lens that I presented. You guys have very good dreams today. I like it. Okay. We have Andrew Smith, who sends a dream. And he says, it's a dream that's pretty sad, but that's okay. These are the best dreams. We love them the most. You send the context first. Yesterday, I learned that my friend Jay was killed in a terrorist attack. Wow, that's fucked up. I'm sorry. The news hit our group chat when one of our friends shared the official confirmation. It felt surreal reading those words on my phone screen, trying to process that someone I knew and cared about was actually gone. My heart goes out to you. I also lost a few friends in the Bataclan attack in Paris that were killed by terrorists, so I know how you feel. Okay, let's read the dream. NH, I have a dream that's pretty sad. When I looked at the screen, so when you saw the news of your friend who died, my heart stopped. It was Jay's name and number. My first thought was that his parents must be calling from his phone, maybe to share some details about the memorial service. But when I answered, it was his voice, the actual familiar voice I never thought I'd hear again. Hey, I need to tell you something, he said. The whole thing was just a prank. I faked my death. And in that strange way that dreams work, it didn't seem bizarre at all. I remember laughing, thinking how classic Jay this was, what a ridiculous but somehow totally acceptable thing to do to mess with your friends. We chatted like nothing had happened, like death was just something you could pretend about for a while before calling to say, just kidding. It wasn't until I woke up that the weight of reality crashed back down, making the dream's absurdity and my acceptance of it feel like a cruel joke. The pain of losing him felt fresh all over again. But for those few dream moments, he was just Jay being Jay, alive and well, and playing one of his pranks. So I have two readings for your dreams. The first reading is your unconscious trying to make you feel better, trying to make you relieve a reality that is not so sad, or your friend was just pranking you. But that's not enough, right? This is something that Jung speaks about, where he says that if you are to analyze a dream, you have to try and understand what the dream is trying to make up for. It's not just here trying to make up for sadness. It's also most likely trying to make up for a lack of something else. And that lack of something might very well be a lack of acceptance. Because when you lose a friend in a terrorist attack, as I've had, it feels surreal. And you cannot fathom that this is a thing. This dream shook you into acceptance because it made you taste a portion of life where Jay was back and then it took it away. And suddenly, as you say, the loss feels fresh because it feels real. It was made real. And now you can enter the process of grieving and of acceptance. If I were to be deeply spiritual about it, I would say that maybe this is something that Jay would have wanted. Jay would have wanted to be able to visit you and say, I am really dead. But he would have not told you that. So the name on the phone, when you see Jay, would have been him announcing it as a prank. But at the end of the day, the message is the same. Whether he says, I am faking my death, or actually I'm really dead, one makes you feel good, one makes you feel bad, but they both convey the same thing, which is, I really died. So I think that this is the message of that dream. Thank you for sharing that with us. Okay, we have Adriano who says, this is my dream. It started in a dark and old library full of old books with webs, and it looked gothic. There were also scrolls and a lot of underdeveloped fetuses stored in jars. Okay. After that, the dream moves to a beach that looks gray and depressing, and the people there start dying in various ways. Heads exploding, people melting their skin off, and stuff like that. I then wake up in my room and call my brother's name and look over his bed, only to find an Asian girl my age sitting on my brother's bed while he is asleep. The girl then becomes a terrifying demon of which I can't recall the appearance, but I felt a lot of fear, something that I never feel. The demon lunges at me and chokes me. Some people pay good money for that. But then I get flooded with anger and I start choking the demon that turns back into the girl. But I didn't stop. I wanted to kill and make the demon suffer. I turned the girl's head into mush and I was bloodthirsty. Then I turned back to the crucifix that is on the right side of my bed and see it getting bigger, and I get flooded with a feeling of calmness and a little bit of sadness that quenches my thirst for blood. I then really wake up and feel all of the emotions all at once. I also feel and see the marks that the demon left me in dream in real life. I'm not joking. I don't know how to explain this. I think I was saved by God that day. Well, that's quite the dream. So let's start again. You begin in an old library full of old books and it looks gothic. So what I get from this is the atmosphere. Okay, it's an unsettling atmosphere. Then you are moved to a gray beach that is depressing, that is also very unsettling, where people die. So the theme of death and violence is omnipresent in that dream. You then wake up to a more familiar place, a place that should not have these themes, in your brother's room. And looking at your brother's bed, you find an Asian girl. This is just me and my personal collective unconscious and bias. But if I were to find a person that is non intimidating, I think an Asian girl would be at the top of my list because I don't like my personal connection to Asian women is that they're nice, they're non-violent, they're soft. I'm not afraid of them. I don't know if that's your connection to them, if you're Asian or white or black, I don't know. But the fact is that you have a figure of innocence that is in a room that should be comfortable, that happens right after you come from words that are not that. And in the moment where you feel like you can be comfortable, the girl becomes a demon. So to me, that is the theme and the symbol of chaos reoccurring when there is order. The fact that the dream tells you you can never be on your guard, and even the most innocuous of situation, even the most innocent of person can be a demon. That could also speak to your own perception of humans, or maybe this speaks to your underlying fear and distrust of people in general. And so then the demon lunges at you, tries to kill you, and you fight back. You fight back into the demon, even when it turns back into the girl. I think that's very interesting. Even when the thing that just assaulted you and is dangerous returns back to something that is innocent and not dangerous, you do not stop because you've learned your lesson. You know that this is just a facade. So the dream is also telling you, hey, appearances can be misleading. You used to be in environments that were very scary where all the people were dying and you were fine. Then you enter an environment that looks okay and you are not fine, you are being attacked. Then there is some religious symbolism in that, where the crucifix that is on the side of the bed becomes bigger when you kill the demon. So this could be, if you're religious, a confirmation of your own mind saying, yes, what you just killed was indeed a demon. And because of that, the crucifix becomes bigger as a way to, in a sense, justify the act, and not justify the act, but sanctify the act, saying you did something good. Your own religion, your own religious morality tells you what you did was right. Do not feel bad for that. And you say you feel a bit of sadness still, but your thirst for blood is gone. And then you wake up and you see the marks that the demon left in my dream. So that is going to be reserved for the world of the paranormal. I know that this is a thing. Some people dream of demons. They wake up with like scratch marks in places that they couldn't have scratched themselves. It's interesting how the camera likes to just fuck with me every time I go back to the page. Okay. Other dream, other dream. We have Felipe Binda. NH. I've been having dreams in which I cheat on my girlfriend of 2.5 years with either exes, coworkers, McDonald's cashiers, etc., until I get caught and feel horrible about it. In real life, I am tempted, but I know I would never actually cheat. Is there a way to make the dreams and urges to stop? It's been almost a year and I feel it's affecting my relationship negatively. Okay, so dreams of infidelity are actually quite common. I have these dreams. The way I look at them is, how do I feel when I wake up? If I felt good after a dream where I cheat on my wife, I would be extremely concerned. But for me, it's the exact opposite. Well, these dreams ruin my day, where I'm like, I fall down in the dumps for the entire day for a sense of shame, but also because deep down I know that my unconscious made me act into something that I don't like. Here is what I've personally been through. If you have these feelings, it's most likely because you are a very lustful person. This is not a judgment of value. I am also like that. This is something to work on. This is part of your shadow self. We have to always understand that when we speak about the shadow and the unconscious, we're not talking about something necessarily negative. Again, remember what we said in the lecture about Jung, saying that all of that comes from primitive impulses and instincts that are contained in the collective unconscious. You are just, in a sense, following the voice of your ancestors, but you are not forced to listen to them. So you have to sit with yourself and question your feelings, because you say that in your conscious life, you catch yourself fantasizing. Here is what I've personally done. I used to be someone who did that as well, thinking this is innocent. This is not innocent. And if you watch today's stream, you know that fantasies become reality. Whatever you feed psychic energy towards becomes your reality. So I want you to stop fantasizing. I know it can be hard, and you could say, well, that's just, again, it's just innocent. It's not innocent. You're preparing yourself. You are creating an architectural structure in your mind that leads to you cheating. You might never cheat, but I can tell you that these dreams are fueled by these fantasies. So you say, for example, that you are tempted. Most likely, this means that you look at these coworkers, at these exes, you think back on them. Try to push that down. I know that some people would say, well, that's repression, it's not healthy. To me, no. To me, that is control. If you have a good girlfriend, this is something that you can do to make the relationship better because you are saying that these dreams are negatively impacting you. Why? Because the unconscious is regurgitating what you feed it. In your conscious life, you feed it these fantasies. Is it any wonder why it's replaying them in your brain when you're sleeping? So that is something that you should be doing. Okay. Then we have Om, who says, in this dream, I am in this plain looking room. I didn't recognize I was all alone in it, yet I felt watched. I was sitting there drawing a picture of a cedar tree when all of a sudden felt this feeling of aggression came out of me, trying to find what was watching me. I started sporadically looking through the room and trashed an entire thing. The lights dim and I get surrounded by the darkness in a way that sort of suffocated me. I woke up with an elevated heart rate. So this is a very esoteric dream. And I have like just reading it, I had an interpretation come to me immediately. So you're in a room and you are drawing a picture of a cedar tree. So you're doing something creative. So in link with the unconscious. All right. This is a form of unconscious work. And suddenly you feel a feeling of aggression. So you become angry and you're trying to find the source, but you cannot find it. That is because in the dream, the source is you. This is your ego reacting negatively at you doing something that would benefit yourself. The ego gets in the way because it knows that if the self benefits, the ego shrinks, and the ego doesn't want that. And because you are in this frenzy of trying to find the source and you don't realize that you are the source, which is also because your ego is blinding you, eventually what happens is that the lights dim and you get surrounded by the darkness and you feel suffocated. This is what happens when you ignore the unconscious. You ignored the unconscious in the dream because of your ego. You stopped doing the unconscious work of doing the creative work. And so the light dims and the unconscious takes over the conscious life, and you end up in a room full of darkness and you essentially die. That is my reading. Okay. We have 10 minutes left. Do we have other people who sent questions related to dreams? I don't think so. But I see a bunch of people who have become new followers, and I really appreciate that, guys. I must say that it might not look like much individually when you're one person and you pledge $3, but I can tell you that when 10, 20, 30 people do it, it's tremendous for me because dreams like dreams, it's a Freudian slip. Streams like this, which is my dream because I love doing that, are only possible because of that. So for those of you who pledged, thank you very much. For those of you that will be pledging, I also thank you tremendously. But that is that. That is the extent of today's dream, of today's stream. I keep saying this. This is crazy. I had a good time. We have 8 or so minutes, so I'm really happy with the timing that we had as well. 2 hours of lecture, an hour of dream analysis is perfect. Going forward, as I said, the next philosophy stream is going to be in January, and you will be warned, of course. It will be on a Wednesday, always. And we might continue like this because I feel like 3 hours of lecture is a bit much, but 2 hours is perfect. Okay. Drius says, I always dream of observing the house of a girl I'm dating. We're both attracted to each other, but because I wasn't a good listener, she had a hard time opening up emotionally. And there are other variables. Well, you are Orpheus in the myth of Orpheus, where you have not yet accepted that this relationship is over. And because of that, you are not learning the lesson, which is that in your next relationship, you need to be a good listener. Just like Orpheus needed to open his fucking ears when Hades told him, hey, if you turn around, you're going to lose your love. Everything is connected, guys. Now, power fantasies exist for a reason. Will you ever do a Lord of the Ring review lecture? That is typically the type of things that will require a video, just like with Dune. As much as I would love to sit there and talk about Dune for hours, it's the type of book that is thematic. And so it's much better for me to write a script and to have portions where I speak about this and that and this. So if I make a philosophy video about Lord of the Rings, it's going to be 5 hours. And it's going to be like, we're going to talk about Christian symbolism, then we're going to talk about self improvement and all of the philosophy, etc., etc. Thoughts on dreams with themes of escape and running. They are extremely common, and it's just you running away from something. So it could be a responsibility, a fear, but at the end of the day, the main theme is running away instead of confronting. So this is your unconscious saying you must confront. I wish we got a Dracula book review. Avis sur les rêves lucides, lucid dreams. I don't really have an opinion on them, to be honest. From like a purely symbolic perspective, it's you taking over and controlling the unconscious. One Piece video stream when? Well, the issue with One Piece, because I love One Piece and I would love to make videos about it, is that the Shueisha is insane and they don't follow the rules. So if I make a video about One Piece and I use panels, which I will want to use, or like One Piece music or whatever for the ambiance, the video could be striked. And I'm not messing with that again. I've already had lawsuits against one Japanese company. It took me 2 years to settle. I'm good. And it was a small company too. It was the company that used to own Grapplebacky. I'm not fighting with the Shueisha. I had nightmares at forced confrontation when I was a child. The person would teleport in front of me. That's interesting. It's like the unconscious being okay, like confront. What do you think of drawing things you've seen in a dream? Well, that's exactly what Jung recommends. I think it's great. NH, I always dream of watching big screens, TVs, etc. And there's always a big crowd that disperses. Help. Now that's very vague, but the watching of something is symbolically being a spectator, so not being an actor. And there's always a big crowd that disperses. So do you mean that there's a crowd that like leaves around you? I have many dreams that are all over the place, but a common theme is saving people, but also being unable to complete logical mental tasks, but easily completing physical ones. Well, that could speak to insecurity in real life, where you feel like your physical is not in line with your spiritual. I'm sorry, Arthur. Are you true Viking hard? Did you write this? Oh, okay. Well, you still have a bunch of them, so let's do another one. Dream 2 from True Viking Heart. There's a girl who I know likes me because friends told me she said she likes me. Okay. I kind of like her. She's cute. I want to go to ask her out throughout my entire dream, and she's always around. And I always procrastinate and miss the opportunity. The entire dream was just this happening over and over again. I have no idea who this girl is. She's not someone I know in real life. Interpretation is fairly simple here. The girl doesn't matter. The identity of the girl doesn't matter. It's your inability to act onto something that you know is certain. You know she likes you. You know you like her. It's open and shut case, Johnson, and you're still unable to do it. And all of your dreams seem to relate to relationships. So this is something that you want to focus on. Then dream 3, we're on our way to the festival I bought tickets for this summer when I realized I forgot to pack clothes, except for one set of basic clothes. It's a 4-day metal festival where you go in band merch, and I also have a battle vest. So forgetting all of that at home and only having normally plain clothes with me for one day sucks. Then we somehow arrive to my grandpa's house, and I go alone into a separate room into the house because I just want some peace and silence finally. Fear of failure, clearly, fear of preparing for something that you're excited for because you procrastinate, which connects with dream number 2. So if procrastination is a big issue in your life, that is a sign of your unconscious that this is something that you have to work on and actually focus on if you want to become a better man. But I think we're going to end here. So, is there going to be a New Year's Eve stream? No. But there will be a stream on the 28th. There is no stream on the 25th. What you see in the schedule, an announcement, it's a video. It's a video that will drop on the 25th where I'm going to make a big announcement for the future of the channel. But on the 28th, we are going to sit together and I'm going to tell stories. I actually sat down after the first story streams thinking there's no way I have more, and I ended up like listing 20 more stories. So we have enough for 2 long ass story streams. That's going to be what is going to happen. There's going to be a physics review stream at the end of this week. At the next week, there's going to be the announcement on Wednesday, then the story stream. So there's a lot going on, and then there's another video I'm working on about standards. I don't know when it's going to drop because I have a lot of people who reached out to me on Coffee, which is related to what I'm going to announce next Wednesday. So I have a lot of work on Coffee itself. But it was great to talk to you guys. I had a great time. If you're watching this video in replay, I hope you enjoyed it as well. And that's that. Again, a big thank you for everyone who subscribed and supported on Coffee. It means a lot because I love philosophy, but there is a material reality to life in which if people subscribe and pledge and donate when I make philosophy streams, it allows me to make more philosophy streams. So that is going to be that. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm going to see you at the end of the week. Bisous.